driving you through the afternoon.
Grandstand Rugby League brings you all the action.
O'Sullivan to Dylan Edwards, throw a gap, he's going to score!
Every big moment across a massive season.
It's hammer time for the Dolphins!
That was amazing footwork, brilliant.
The latest news and expert opinion on everything Rugby League.
We're loving Rugby League in 2023.
Grandstand Rugby League. Find us on your radio, ABC Sport Digital and on the ABC Listen app.
That pass was pretty, it had lipstick on it.
Good afternoon, Adam Story with an ABC News update. The Coalition MP Julian Leeser says he will campaign for the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament after resigning from Shadow Cabinet over the Liberal Party's opposition to the model. Mr Leeser will advocate for changes to the government's proposal, but says he will ultimately campaign for a yes vote. The federal government has agreed to temporarily suspend a World Trade Organisation dispute over Chinese government tariffs on Australian barley. After finding on the dispute was due to be handed down within days, but the two countries have instead agreed to attempt to reach a settlement. Premier Chris Minns has hinted the delivery of the Metro West may be delayed after his government learnt the true cost of the mega rail project. Mr Minns confirmed that internal Treasury briefings show the 24-kilometre line from the CBD to Parramatta will cost more than $25 billion rather than the $16 billion price tag announced by the former government. A strike force has been set up to investigate the death of a woman whose body was found at a unit at Marylands in Sydney's West on Sunday night. Officers arrived to find the woman's husband administering CPR, but she died at the scene. The Australian Banking Association says a plan to run wargame exercises on cyber attacks underscores the threat to national security. The federal government is inviting major banks and financial institutions to participate in the exercise to ensure they're better prepared. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reversed his decision to fire his defence minister. The decision set off a wave of mass protests and a general strike, forcing the Israeli leader to suspend his plan to overhaul the judicial system. In sport, Newcastle has been dealt a blow with co-captain Jayden Brailey out for the remainder of the season. Brailey limped from the field in Sunday's win over the Warriors, with scans confirming he's ruptured an anterior cruciate ligament in his right knee. Partly cloudy in Sydney this afternoon, a partly cloudy day tomorrow with the chance of a shower or two, but later in the evening and a top of 24. More news at 4 o'clock.
Hey, thanks for that, Adam. We'll catch you then. Right now, though, good afternoon and welcome to Drive.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
Very shortly, great Australian stuff. Yes, we'll be joined by Tony Armstrong, his brand new TV show, and the first episode, Made for Me, looks at food. The Freddo Frog, do you know it was the first Australian animated cartoon spinning off from the chocolate treat, but you could have all been eating chocolate mice. Tony will explain why when we catch up with him. And then I'm going to catch up with somebody I've watched over the years, John Watkins. He was, of course, the former New South Wales Deputy Premier. I did a Sunday brunch with him a few years ago now where he explained what it's like to have Parkinson's. And on this World Parkinson's Day, he's written a really just compassionate piece in the Sydney Morning Herald. So I'm going to find out why he has come to terms with Parkinson and how it affects his life. But before we do anything,
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Let's have a look at what's happening on the roads. Jeff Wallace joins us from the Australian Traffic Network and southbound on the Harbour Tunnel looking heavy, Jeff.
It certainly is. I'm on my cameras here at the TMC. Very heavy North Sydney in towards the tunnel and continuing that way down through Moore Park in the ED Tunnel. Also looking at the M7, it's getting a bit busy northbound Cecil Hills up towards the M4 and the M4. Busy as well around the Cumberland Highway out towards the Prospect Highway. Even the Cumberland Highway I'm seeing right now very slow past Dunmore Street, Wentworthville, down towards the M4. I'm Jeff Wallace, the Australian Traffic Network.
Thanks for that, Jeff. We'll catch up with you later through the day, but right now on ABC Radio, as I said, this Tuesday at 8 p.m, or also on iView, it's great Australian stuff.
We eat 270 million of these every year. But what makes one bit of stuff just stuff and other stuff, like this flaky piece of perfection, great stuff? And why is this little beauty not just great, but great Australian stuff? Is it about nostalgia, usefulness, or does the stuff we call great actually say something about us, about who we are or who we want to be? Or is it just that it tastes so damn good? I mean, about that, can I have a bite yet?
Sure thing, Tony.
Finally. Enjoy the show.
And with his mouth full, but all the way from, sorry, I've just looked at our text board, Tony, and we're all the way from our Melbourne studios, and I just thought of the text. Peter texted in to go, Geelong had a win. How unusual. That was cheap, Peter. But there. Tony, welcome to the show.
Simon, how you doing?
Good. They are Geelong, the greatest team of all. They are Geelong. They're always on the ball, but we're not here to talk about that.
We don't want to talk about Geelong.
Yeah, we do.
They knocked off the Swannies last year in the granny.
I know. Right? There we go.
It's still hurting.
It's Tuesday, and after 3 grueling losses and being able to enjoy a win, Peter just happens to send that really nasty text.
Well, good on you, Peter. I hope you're having a good arvo, mate.
Well, Tony, let's move on and say the item you were talking about there that is so popular, it is, of course, the...
Freddo Frog?
No, the Australian meat pie. You had to eat it right in the opening.
Sorry, I heard you talk about the Freddo Frog, and then I kind of tuned out a little bit. I've got to say, I was waiting for you to bring me in, and I heard you talk about the Freddo Frog. But yeah, I'll tell you what, the meat pie. I can't tell you how many of them I ate in the filming of this show. They're so good. They are so good. Perfect accompaniment for road trips, for watching sport, for just chilling out. So yum.
And that's what you bring in, not just yourself, but historians, journos, chefs, comedians, all who have their own take on these things.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I think sort of more broadly, I think Australians themselves all have a different, I guess, relationship with a lot of these things that we cover in the 4 episodes. And I think it's that kind of connective tissue that is actually a big cornerstone and a big part of our culture itself, because we are quite a funny old bunch down here in Australia. And I think, like, our relationship with a lot of these things, like tonight's episode is food. You know, we've got things like the Chico roll, Vegemite, the Granny Smith apple. Obviously, we've talked about the meat pie. But then the Freddo Frog, the macadamia nut. We've got these different relationships with all of these things, and you know, the talking heads that we have on the show all give a different perspective on them all, and I think they're representative of greater society. And it is, I think that connective tissue that connects us all.
You mentioned the Chico roll. You mentioned the meat pie, the macadamia, which has been eaten for 60,000 years. But the meat pie from 1788, is that why it's an icon? Because it's been here so long? Is it an icon because all through the years it's been affordable? I mean, in your program, we see when, shockingly, it went from 20 cents to 23 cents a pie.
I mean, can you believe it?
We
should have been in the streets rioting. I mean, I know the French are quite unhappy right now about the pension age, but I mean, that extra 3 cents. Let's get out there. Let's let them know we're not happy. But I just think the meat pie. Well, not only is it delicious, it's just. I think it's been an accompaniment to so many things that we find great, as I mentioned before. You know, for instance, you go to a sporting event or something and it's a really affordable snack for someone to have, or you're on a road trip and you walk past the Bain Marie and you're, I shouldn't, but I will. And Chico roll is quite similar with the Bain Marie. But yeah, I think so many of these things, particularly with food, you know, you have food that accompanies something else that you're doing quite often.
Somebody asks, is there pavlova in there? Well, that's pretty contentious as to whether it's great Australian or great Kiwi stuff. Tony Armstrong is with us. And you also mentioned there the Freddo Frog. Explain how it might have been the Freddo Mouse.
Yeah, well, so originally it was slated to be a mouse-shaped chocolate bar, but one of the young employees, I can't remember the young employee's name off the top of my head, it was Harry something, suggested a frog might actually be more likeable and pretty good point because, a lot of people get a little bit worried when there's a mouse in the house. There's the odd trope of people jumping up on our tables or on the top of chairs when a mouse comes cruising through. So it ended up being the frog, which is it's crazy to think now, just because it's so inbuilt and ingrained in our minds as being the frog. But, it could have quite easily been a mouse.
And look, been funny, let's face it, lucky it was a frog because given it spun off into an animated cartoon, would there ever be an animated cartoon about a mouse?
Well, I mean, I know you're setting me up here, and imagine Minnie and Mickey just being like, well, look, this is our patch. Like, Minnie and Mickey Mouse have just been there going, look, sorry, you can't just have you can't have this. So I'm glad it was a frog so we could have the Freddo frog.
The other one you pay great greetings to is the Australian Milk Bar. And also it came out of a time when we opened our arms to migration.
Welcome to Australia, to your new home. Welcome you people from the old lands, from Britain, from the countries of Western Europe. Welcome you people from the South. It's really good to see you.
Welcoming to those arms to the people that would, and particularly you focus on the Greek influence, come up with the cafe or the Paragon Cafe or indeed the Greek Milk Bar.
Yeah, I think it's really important to touch on, I guess, migration or immigration to Australia because, we are quite a multicultural society down here and, I think such a big part of growing up, particularly for me, was going to the Milk Bar, going to the corner store, going down there, picking up some stuff from there. And I think it is something that is ingrained in so many of our minds. And they were, I think, subtly or not so subtly, a great tool for people to be able to, come to Australia and make their own way, which is obviously something that when we as a country are acting the way that we want to, I think it's something that we're great at.
Tony Armstrong is with us. It's Great Australian Stuff on tonight at 8 o'clock on ABC TV. You can also catch it on iView. But you couldn't do food in Australia without mentioning...
Now you can choose the happiest little Vegemite and win this glamorous Ford Cortina. Yes, Vegemite is a great food and so tasty. Not only for the kiddies, but for all your family. Presenting your family health guide. Research shows missing link in Australian diets. The delicious way to correct your vitamin B1 deficiency is with Vegemite Day.
Now come along. Eat up your Vegemite like a good boy.
For the good of your little one, every day, a little Vegemite.
Goes a long way. Tony Armstrong is with us. Great Australian Stuff on your telly tonight at 8 p.m. But you do go through the history, the evolution, and the important question you ask is why does some things become icons and others fall by the wayside?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There are some things I think that people thought were going to be amazing ideas and unbelievable parts of Australian culture that didn't quite hit. And then you've got something like, Vegemite, for instance, that all of a sudden, becomes just about our most iconic food export, or at least one of our most iconic things ever. And, yeah, it's really interesting to kind of delve into how and why things are hits and or misses and then the impact that they have on our culture. You see whenever someone famous comes out to Australia, we always give them a bit of Vegemite. We get them to try, and then we get them and we ask them, how much do you want to put on? How heavily do you butter your toast? All those kind of things. It's really interesting and it's really fun as well to kind of dig in and learn and dive in. And yeah, I had a great time in the making of it, and I hope people have a great time in the watching and the learning that comes with it.
And in fact, we've focused on tonight's episode, which is food, but the 4 episodes take you through land, home, and then almost like events from Mardi Gras to Phar Lap to Marngrook and more.
Yeah, exactly right. So we go the whole way through. Like we talk about the land. Obviously, there's so many, I guess, not just good but also challenging stories to tell there, which we make sure that we don't shy away from, and then talk about home. Things like the Australian Women's Weekly Birthday Cakebook. Sorry. That gets a run. The Lightburn Zeta, the Hills Hoist. And then, as you said, all the way through to play. We talk about Marngrook and how it influenced AFL, Speedos. I don't think you can talk about Great Australian stuff without mentioning Speedos somewhere. And, of course, the Mardi Gras as well, which is one of the great events that we put on. So, we try to cover sort of as much as we can with Australian culture, and try to have a bit of fun doing it as well, which is something that I'm really happy that we did.
Well, it sounds like, and I enjoyed episode 1 immensely. Episodes 2, 3 and 4. 3 is home, 2 is land, and the final one kicking off with the AFL. Thanks to Peter in Glossodia, who says, pleased to say, I would never make comments about your beloved Geelong. Peter, love you long time. And Jackie says, we have a fully restored 1954 Hills Hoist in our backyard, still going strong and keeping our washing dry from sunshine and wind. How's that?
I mean, I'm pretty jealous of that, aren't I? That sounds amazing.
The 54 Hills Hoist. And somebody else says you haven't lived until you've had a pickled onion in Manningatton, which I'm not really sure where Manningatton is, but there we go. Next episode, you'll have to do the pickled onion. Congratulations on a great series. Look forward to seeing it at 8 o'clock tonight, Tony.
Yeah, tune in, everyone. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks, Simon.
Tony Armstrong, and the program is called Great Australian Stuffs, part of a whole host of new Australian television coming your way.
Well, it's not a normal cafe.
We specialise in the milk of the platypus.
Auntie Donna have millions of views. Now the superstars of socials have an ABC TV show and a cafe.
Here's your sandwich, you dingus.
And more celebrity cameos than latte flavours.
Doesn't that sound silly? Pretty silly to me, Ray.
Auntie Donna's Coffee Cafe starts Wednesday, April 12 on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
album in 1980 on ABC Radio. This is Drive. Simon Marnie filling in for Richard Glover. And news just coming through. The New South Wales Labor Party has officially asked for a recount in the seat of Ryde. It's the last seat to be decided in the state election more than a fortnight ago. Ryde's Liberal Party candidate Jordan Lane claimed the Sydney seat over the Easter long weekend. He is around 50 votes ahead of Labor's Lyndall Howson, and Premier Chris Minns currently holds 45 seats in the state's lower house, which is just too short of a majority. So the Labor Party has officially asked for a recount in the seat of Ryde.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
At 9 minutes away from 4, I was taken to an article in this week's Sydney Morning Herald. This disease has taken so much from me, but I'm grateful for the unexpected positives. I first saw John Watkins talking at a fundraising dinner for Neura, where he outlined how deep brain stimulation therapy had changed his Parkinson path. But since then, I've seen also the ups and the downs, and John Watkins is behind that article and joins us on the line. John, for me, when I saw you give that speech, I'd always wondered why you'd left Parliament and government, but that confirmed it for me. And we do seem to be having a problem with that line. We might try and just get him back on the phone if that's possible. As we wait for that, Mary has just sent in a text going, "Hi Simon, when I was a young child, I met Victor Richardson of Victor Motor Mowers. Such a nice man. His wife said he was always tinkering, and it certainly paid off." That's in reference to the interview we were doing with Tony Armstrong on Great Australian Stuff. And I know the Victor Motor Mower is coming up in some of the later episodes. And so that'll be there. After 4 o'clock this morning, we're going to be asking the question, have you travelled multi-generationally? It's an interesting concept as travel costs go up. Families going away, mums and dads, kids and grandparents. Have you ever done that? And I'd love to be hearing from you. 1300 222 702. I know when our son did college in America, we had a great time crisscrossing from North Carolina to New Orleans, stopping off at Nashville, Asheville and Memphis. And he'd drop in for a couple of days and then leave, and the multi-generational travel worked. Perhaps you've been on a trip. I'd love to hear from you. After 4 o'clock, 1300 222 702.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
John Watkins is back with us, the former New South Wales Deputy Premier and current Chair of Catholic Health Australia. I was saying him just before we lost you, John, that I'd always wondered why you left Parliament and government, and you explained that very clearly at that Neura speech, and you were talking about deep brain simulation therapy.
That's right, Simon. When I left, something I didn't know.
Look, I don't know whether we've got the curse of the Watkins curse, or it's because you work with Paul Field and he's gone in and hacked the phone. But this phone line is pretty terrible as well. We might try a different method of getting in contact.
Nightlife with Philip Clark.
We're still sitting reasonably well off. Unemployment's still at 50-year lows. The people are really starting to hurt.
Refreshing and real conversations.
How do you define food having style?
It's about bringing out the natural qualities so that it looks like you just want to dive into it.
Nightlife with Philip Clark. Monday to Thursday from 10 on ABC Radio Sydney. Or listen anytime on the ABC Listen app.
It is 5 minutes to 4. Shall I jump into the Watkins pool one more time? How's that line going? It was breaking up really badly. John Watkins, can you hear me?
Yes, Simon. How are you?
Good, that's much better. So I'll one more time. The idea that you had to leave government because you realised the Parkinson was kicking in.
I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't certain it was Parkinson. So it's a very difficult condition to diagnose, and that took about a year after I left Parliament to diagnose. But But then when it was diagnosed, I've lived with it 15 years, Simon.
And in that time, I, like so many more people, have come to understand what it is. It's not just the faltering speech, the stuttering and the jerky movements. It can be many factors to many different people.
Yes, it can. The main thing is that the dopamine stops being produced in the brain. Now, dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It helps with communications and movement. And so often tremor is key to it, often difficulty moving, but there's other things. Masking of the face, loss of sense of smell, difficulty with swallowing. I've lost the ability to swim because I can no longer coordinate myself. And there's almost anything it can change, it does in the body, and it's almost malicious in the way it does it. Difficulties with mental health, anxiety, all of those things impact on most people living with dementia at some stage along this path.
You say 15 years after the diagnosis, symptoms still surprise you, the mental toll as well as the physical.
Yeah, I have to say, I think that's probably the worst with me, is the anxiety, the catastrophising and the depression that goes along with, which is a symptom of the disease, and it's very difficult to cope with, especially when you change your life, and it changes your life entirely anyway. Your physicality disappears, you become this person where you cannot do the things, the simple things, getting down, play with my children with Lego, my grandchildren with Lego, jumping in and out of the car, jumping in and out of the swimming pool, getting up from your chair after watching TV to wash up. These things become difficult. The mundane and the normal of life become increasingly difficult.
And yet in this article, and I'm heading off towards the news now, you do make a point of pointing out the positives, the unexpected positives.
People, yes, and the basic one is that you live with PD, you don't die from it. There is hope. There are people around, therapists. There are therapies like deep brain stimulation, like the medications that do work. It's not something to despair over. There is hope in the future, and I'd counsel people that have been newly diagnosed to hold on to that, seek it out.
And also the friends and family that are with you, the other people living with Parkinson's, but all the nurses, therapists and clinicians.
There's a whole team of people out there who work towards you coping better and me coping better with my symptoms, and it does help. Doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. There's a whole bunch of people there who do make a difference if you can seek them out. I'd encourage people who are living with Parkinson's to do that.
And I love the final blessing in that you have learnt not to feel as sorry for yourself.
No, I think that was difficult, Simon, because it changes you. You can't do the things that you used to be able to, but who can as they age anyway. But I think I hope I've come to terms with it a lot more. I'm more accepting of what my lot is.
Well, we're counting down to the seconds to the news, but I also know those morning walks are very important. So say hello to your fellow walkers for me, and thanks for writing such a good article.
Thanks, Simon. Appreciate it.
John Watkins, and today is World Parkinson's Day. You're on ABC Radio. This is Drive.
Lend us your ears and use the ABC Listen app in the car. It'll automatically shush when you get calls or navigation instructions.
At the next street.
Just download the ABC Listen app and favourite ABC Radio Sydney.
Afternoon, Adam Story with ABC News. The Minister for Indigenous Australians has praised Liberal MP Julian Leeser's decision to resign from the Shadow Cabinet and campaign for the yes vote in the upcoming referendum. Political reporter Noel Haggerty has more.
The now former Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Julian Leeser, says he will use his freedom as a backbencher to push for changes to the wording of the proposed constitutional amendment.
Ahead of us is the parliamentary and committee process. The next 2 months are about moving the referendum to a more secure footing to answer the doubts
many voters have.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton has repeated his call for more detail.
I know that people are motivated by a feel-good or a vibe. I understand that, but you need to dig a bit deeper.
Minister for Indigenous Australians Linda Burney says Mr Leeser has shown strength in standing up for his principles.
Labor has asked for a recount in the state seat of Ryde. It's the last seat to be decided in the state election more than a fortnight ago. Ryde's Liberal Party candidate Jordan Lane claimed the Sydney seat over the Easter long weekend. He was 50 votes ahead of Labor's Lyndall Howison. The government currently holds 45 seats in the lower house, 2 short of majority. Engineers say they've identified the cause of smoke which caused a Rex Airlines flight from Sydney to Melbourne to make an emergency landing this morning. The captain of the Boeing 737 declared an emergency after smoke was reported in the plane's toilet, causing the evacuation of all 146 passengers on board just after 11:30. The airline says the aircraft is now serviceable and will resume operations this afternoon. The federal government has agreed to suspend its appeal to the World Trade Organisation amid a long-running dispute with the Chinese government over Australian barley exports. China has agreed to review the tariffs imposed in 2020, and the federal government says it reserves the right to resume its WTO action if the tariffs aren't lifted within the next 3 months. Trade Minister Don Farrell says Australia's preferred method of resolving disputes is to negotiate with trading partners.
And on this occasion, we have sought dialogue with our Chinese counterparts to see if there is any possibility of resolving these impediments through sensible dialogue.
The state's Chief Health Officer, Dr Kerry Chant, is urging people to get their influenza vaccine amid a current spike in cases. People at higher risk are being urged to get inoculated against the virus now, with experts saying it's difficult to predict how severe the looming flu season will be. Dr Chant says it's also a good time to get a COVID booster.
We do urge people to go and get vaccinated now. We are seeing an uptick in influenza, and we believe that any time from now on is a really good time to get vaccinated and also take the opportunity to get your COVID vaccine.
Australia's Defence Chief has described the apparent leaking of sensitive intelligence documents from the United States as a serious incident. US officials are reportedly reviewing how they share their most sensitive secrets inside the government and tackling the diplomatic fallout from the release of the confidential files. General Angus Campbell has told the Lowy Institute Australia is engaging with its US partners to work out the ramifications.
This, by reports, is a serious leak. It is being investigated seriously by US authorities, and they are engaging with partners in order to better understand the potential consequences.
Taiwan's Defence Ministry says China is still operating 8 military ships off the island's waters, despite the official end of a 3-day naval exercise. The BBC's Shamir Khalil reports.
In a rare show of unity, both Taiwan's ruling and opposition parties issued a joint statement condemning the drills. China simulated precision attacks and blockades of Taiwan, sending up dozens of fighter jets and bombers. Taiwan's defense ministry said that more than 30 Chinese aircraft entered its air defense space. The exercises have also caused concern in Japan, especially as its southern islands sit close to Taiwan and could become caught up in a conflict. The Japanese Defense Minister Yasukazu Hamada described China's military drills as intimidating training to seize sea and air control around the island.
Tyler Wright will meet Molly Picklum in the women's final at the World Surf League event at Bells Beach in Victoria. And the men's final is another all-Australian affair between Ryan Cullinan and Ethan Ewing. And Sydney Swans superstar Lance Franklin will miss Friday night's clash in Adelaide against Richmond with a knee injury. The 8 all-time Australian suffered a knock to his knee in the last quarter against Port Adelaide on Saturday night and has been unable to train this week. Dry and mostly sunny across the state for the remainder of the afternoon. There is the chance of a shower on the far southeastern border, though. Partly cloudy in Sydney, partly cloudy tomorrow. The chance of a shower or two later in the evening and 24. It's 4:05.
Thanks for that, Adam. He'll be back at 4:30 with the latest news headlines.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
I think I'm getting this drive thing. I'm not saying morning anymore, and I'll be here with you for the next week. Richard Glover back from holidays next week, but in this half hour we're going to catch up with David Holtberg. He moved from the US to Melbourne to take on a challenging role for the Australian Ballet, and boy, is he blowing them away. We'll find out the story behind Don Quixote in this half hour. And I also keen to find out from you, travelling with grown children? It seems to be a thing. I know we did it with our son from North Carolina down to New Orleans through the Americana Trail of Nashville, Asheville, Memphis. And it was actually really good to have their perspective on what we were seeing. So have you travelled with grown children, and what's it been like? 1300 222 702. We'll catch up with Burn Groundwater to find out why it's a thing, but I want to hear from you as well. You can always text 0467 222 702. We were talking to John Watkins about an article he wrote in the Herald today about living with Parkinson's. Angie's in Bondi. You were particularly moved by that article.
Oh yes, I was very, very moved by it, and as I was reading it, I was thinking about my father-in-law who had Parkinson's, and he was an older generation of John, obviously. But I just wondered how much he suffered in silence and didn't say all those things that John expressed about the not the pros, but the cons of it, and that generation that would never complain. And I just said to my husband, I just wonder how much your father suffered and didn't want to bother anybody, didn't want to tell anybody.
Was he one of those stiff upper lip type guys?
Not so much a stiff upper lip, but just that, he died at, 89, so just that I don't want to bother you. I don't want you to worry about me. I don't, I don't want to tell you that it was obvious towards the end he was having hallucinations and all that sort of stuff, but I just wonder how much he didn't want to say because he didn't want to worry the family. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just I feel bad. Well, I kind of feel bad now and think, well, should we have asked him more? Should we have said, "Are you managing? Is there anything more we can do?"
I don't think you should feel bad.
As well?
I don't think you should feel bad because you didn't have articles like John Watkins to steer you in those days, and that's exactly why he wrote that article. So
absolutely.
The generation from now get permission.
Yep.
You never had permission, so how could you do it?
Yeah, and I think they were that generation that you didn't ask them those sort of questions.
No.
You didn't ask them how they were feeling. But, all parents, I was so moved by it. What a beautiful but sad. But then he ended up on such a positive note, hope. That there's always hope.
Angie.
And,
thanks.
Very moving. I wish him all the very best.
Thanks for phoning in. Angie in Bondi.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
Before we do Don Quixote, let's do the traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Crow's Nest, Warringah Freeway approaching Western. A truck has broken down. One of 4 city-bound lanes is closed. There seems to be very heavy traffic on the Great Western Highway from Mount Victoria to Katoomba. They're saying it's holiday traffic, but if you're in there, just settle back, listen to the radio because there are heavy delays. Otherwise, roadworks and the like, some festivals and the Sydney Royal Show. You can find out about the traffic at livetraffic.com.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
Celebrating 60 years, it's quite an appropriate ballet for the Australian Ballet to choose. It's Don Quixote, but not as you know it. It's a revisit to the 1973 film from Sir Robert Helpmann and Rudolf Nureyev. And to explain more, we're joined by David Hallberg. Welcome to the studio.
Great to be in.
Nice to have you here, and congratulations on the production. You told The Australian once that your role as the director is to read the room, read what's going on around you, and read your audience. You would have had a pretty positive reading on Saturday night.
It felt like a good reading. And by that, I mean, the audiences that are very proud and very devoted to the Australian Ballet. And I'm reading the room. I mean, I'm a visitor. I live here, but I'm non-Australian, as you can probably hear. But
it's a great Italian accent, by the way.
Thanks. It's French.
But
I feel actually a huge responsibility to be artistic director of one of the best arts organizations in the country, and that's what I mean by reading the room.
You took on a production that is a fond favourite of many of the traditionalists of the ballet, but you're also not afraid of dipping your foot into the new as well.
Well, we have to keep our art form fresh. We are a classical art form, so we have a bit more work, I think, to do than like the film industry or, artistic genres that continue to reinvent and have the new. But when you're taking a classic like Don Quixote, you can do it like a museum piece. But that's the risk, because then audiences for today I think, can get quite bored. It gets dusty. You have to take that kind of repertoire like Don Quixote, like Swan Lake, and really read today's audiences, read the room, and give them like a fresh perspective of it. And I think that's what Don Quixote is doing at the Sydney Opera House.
In that same article, you said you had to keep the heart active, and you do that by injecting life into new productions. And I'm thinking the one where you sign up the talents of Deb Cheetham and Alice Topp.
Yeah, well, as well. I mean, I don't think I do look elsewhere. I have experience internationally. I danced all over the world. I have these contacts. But also when I moved here, I realized the artistic community here in Australia is so rich. There's so many artists practicing in this country that haven't, moved away to have careers in London or New York. They're having really robust careers, whether they're composers or choreographers, visual artists, musicians. And the platform that the Australian Ballet has gives this opportunity to those working Australian artists.
And tell me a little bit more about Identity. I know that's coming up, but it's a piece in two parts. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. Well, we're celebrating our 60th, as you know. And so we're looking at what identity means to these two choreographers, Alice Topp, who is our resident choreographer, and Dan Riley, who is a First Nations choreographer and artistic director of Australian Dance Theatre. So they've taken kind of their interpretation on what identity means to them, whether it's dance identity, Australian identity, and two very, very different interpretations. It's been beautiful to watch the rehearsal process and can't wait to get it on stage.
And so that makes me reflect on something like Don Quixote, where you are maintaining a respect for the original 1973 film, in fact, the original 1970 Australian ballet, but you also want to make it relevant to 2023.
Yeah, the film really put the Australian ballet on the international map because Rudolf Nureyev, who is the most famous dancer probably ever, took the company, filmed this movie in a sweltering heat wave in some random airport hangar in Melbourne. And what came of that put the company on the international map. But then it was, instead of it just being in the history books, I decided to bring that production, the beautiful sets, the beautiful costumes, onto the stage, reinterpreted for today's audiences. So the production has a bit of a cinematic flair to it. You sit down, the orchestra, starts up, and then we see film credits at the beginning of the production, and you see starring Marcus Morelli as Basilio and Benedict Beme as Kitri, like you would do in the film. But then the curtain, obviously, the screen rises, and then this whole thing comes to life on stage.
But also, it's a piece of different parts. For example, the first act very different to the second act.
Yeah, I mean, that's Don Quixote. It's to be honest, there's a Cervantes novel, right, of Don Quixote, the original, which is probably 1,200, 1,600 pages long. Don't ask if we've followed the novel in the ballet, because just don't ask those kinds of questions. Come and sit down, enjoy the ballet. It's really, as I say, it's like the fireworks of ballet. It's sort of as close to the circus as we get, because there's turns, there's jumps, there's music. It's very, very exciting, very audience friendly.
In fact, towards the end, the dancing from the two key dancers, Benedict and Marcus, is so athletic and so you actually gasp at some of the moves.
Yeah, it's one of the most difficult. It's one of the most technically difficult. And you have to have such an assurance of your technique as a dancer to be able to carry both of those roles.
And whilst I mentioned your sort of senior ballet loyalists will love it, for somebody that's never been to a ballet before, this is a great introduction, because it's almost as though you overcome that fear of I don't know what the story is by almost acting in the first part.
Yeah, and the story, it's a nonverbal art form, right? We're not speaking on stage. Yeah. So we have a lot of work to do to be able to tell a story. Yeah, properly to audience members. But I always say, if you've never been to ballet, you either like it or you don't. If you go to an art show or you go to hear music, you either like the music or you don't like the music. And same with Don Quixote. Like, you sit down, you don't have to overthink it. You can just sit down and enjoy the performance. And in this production, there's such a freshness to classical ballet. It's not a museum piece. It's not dusty. It's not dated. You can sense the fact that it's a new, beautiful, sparkling production.
We're with the artistic director for the Australian Ballet, David Hallberg, looking at Don Quixote, which is at the Sydney Opera House.
The nature of the choreography and the flair of this ballet lets people kind of let rip and tap into this maybe primal artistic energy or something. Like, you see people go on stage and you see the men jump and turn, and you're just like, oh.
And it's breathtaking. Audience would go home gasping, laughing, smiling, and screaming. It's like a rock concert.
I can hear the orchestra in the background, and one of the things that struck me about the performance is you see the audience, they are there as part of the performance, and it's a huge orchestra for the ballet.
It is. I mean, it's a gorgeous score, and we are so lucky to have orchestra members in the pit. This is not a recorded music kind of performance, and it's that kind of the marriage of of live music, of live dance. There's nothing coming through an electrical wire, per se.
And yet you manage, while we focus on the two characters of Khitri, Basilio, and indeed Don Quixote, you also have a beautiful ensemble of dancers to support them.
Yeah, an amazing group of dancers. I mean, there are 78 dancers in this company. So the production is big. And there's some really great ensemble work. I mean, there's definitely the stars. When Khitri comes out, when Benny comes out, the audience entrance applause, the star has arrived kind of thing. But then there's really beautiful ensemble work, corps de ballet work, as we say. And that's when I get my most micromanaging, I guess. The finger goes here, the leg goes there, just so everything looks really sharp, really on point, really pristine.
What are you like to work with?
I'm not a micromanager, Simon. No,
Are you strict?
I am strict. I mean, I have expectations, I have expectations of myself. When I was a dancer, I had enormous expectations, which, to be honest, was probably my greatest asset, but also my greatest weakness, because sometimes they were just too high. But I try and really push the dancers beyond the limits that they think of themselves, but then don't push them beyond a breaking point, because I don't want, an unhealthy culture of dancers in the company.
It's what you've brought to the company. You've actually looked at more than just the role of the artistic director. You're almost the person that looks after the mental health. You're looking at the well-being, and the ballet company as a whole. That was a very deliberate strategy.
It is a deliberate strategy because, it's not an era anymore of just go on stage. We don't care how you're feeling or how you or you know what's going on mentally.
Plie till you die.
Don't plie till you die. Plie till maybe something arises in an injury or mental wellness or anything, and we take care of it. I mean, we really, really take care of the dancers at the Australian Ballet because it's important for us to have a holistic dancer and not just a one-sided dancer that I only care about the product on the stage.
Sounds like you're having fun.
Well, you know what? I have to say, when I
of David Hallberg, she says you sound incredibly similar to him.
People do tell me I've looked like Tom Cruise in my life. No, I'm kidding. But thank you for that. I will take that to my grave, a Tom Cruise comparison.
Congratulations on the Don Quixote on at the Sydney Opera House as part of the Australian Ballet's 60th birthday. And thanks for coming along and being on Drive.
Thank you, Simon. Great to see you.
You're listening to Drive with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
The great thing about your local school is, you know, you walk to school, you never know what's going to happen on the way, who you're going to meet.
I know. Sarah McDonald and James Valentine.
I remember my daughter's second day of school, they were like, draw what you saw on the way to school this morning. And she had the principal give her a star because she saw a mermaid. Now, I don't know how she saw a mermaid on the way to school, but she saw a mermaid.
Oh, they were more common then.
Breakfast with James Valentine and mornings with Sarah McDonald.
What's happened to the mermaids on the streets of Sydney?
They're in danger.
ABC Radio Sydney.
We need more mermaids. It is 4:21 on ABC Radio Sydney Drive. Ian Verinder with us shortly to talk finance, but I want to hear from you as well. 1300 222 702, 1300 222 702. Text 0467 922 702. Have you gone away with the grandkids, or have you, as a sort of 27, 28, 30-year-old, gone away with your parents? The multi-generation visit. Well, I want to hear if you've been travelling with grown children. We personally found it to be incredibly rewarding. So I wonder if you did as well, or if you were in the younger set of that family travel. Was it a little bit laborious? 1300 222 702. Join in the conversation because we're joined on the line by travel writer Ben Groundwater. And is this becoming more of a thing, Ben Groundwater?
Yeah, most definitely. It's a growing trend. It's something that a lot of people have become a lot more interested in, particularly since COVID, I think, when, during lockdowns and during the height of the pandemic, so many of us were cut off from family. And that was, I think it really stoked an interest in family and a sort of evaluation of what means the most to us, and family is a huge part of that. And so people now want to go on holidays with those people. It's not so much going to visit them as going somewhere else with them, and there's a whole lot of ways to do that, from really super budget trips where you're going and staying in campsites to things that are a bit more luxurious, like going on cruises, which tend to cater to a lot of different demographics. So there are certainly ways, and it's definitely popular.
1300 222 702 is our number. I'm prompted by an article in The Guardian from Emma Rubin, and she said that when she feels more like a child when travelling with her parents at 24 years old, I revert into the teenage version of myself to keep my passport safe and my dad to put the itinerary together. There is that risk, though, that you'll want to behave when you're travelling with your parents.
I would think there's a risk that you'd want to misbehave. I thought that would be the main thing for a 24-year-old travelling with their parents. I know certainly when I was going away with my parents when I was around that age, it felt a little bit like I had to be on best behaviour rather than doing the things that I might normally have done on those trips. My children are very young at this point, so I'm not really in that demographic, but it's going to be very interesting to see how that goes as time goes on.
We had an interesting insight when our son was doing college in America, and we've caught up with him in South Carolina and did the Americana Trail down to New Orleans. I did notice that a lot of the time he joined us was when we were dining at good restaurants.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, the cost of living is really high at the moment, so that's another reason why I'm sure young people are more than happy to go on holidays with their parents at the moment because, hey, it's a mostly free holiday a lot of the time, and there's something to be said for that. But it is a really great bonding experience. As anybody knows, whether you've travelled with family or just with friends or by yourself, the people that you spend time with on these trips, it's a really deeply and intensely bonding exercise. And so I can totally see why families would want to do that intergenerational travel to get people back together again.
Are there businesses that design this style of travel, or is it generally the 24 and the 48-year-old have to work it out for themselves?
Look, there are certainly businesses that cater for this style of travel. I don't know that they're necessarily 100% pitched at that idea. But as I said, there's a lot of tour groups, tour groups that people may have thought of as being just for young people before or just for old people are certainly targeting whole families now so that several demographics can travel together. And obviously cruising is a really big industry. And they know that they can cater to all of those people as well. So they're certainly targeting those markets.
Well, let's see if it becomes a thing. Ben, thanks for joining us.
No problem. Good to talk.
Ben Groundwater, travel writer. Have you done it as well? 1300 222 702. Have you travelled with the grown-up kids? Or are you a grown-up kid that's travelled with the aunt, the grand, the parent? What was it like? 1300 222 702. Paul's in Freshie. Your kids are in their early 20s.
Yeah. Hi, Simon. That's Paul from Freshwater. And we've got a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old. And we went to Cancun in Mexico within the last 2 years with them. And that was fantastic. And probably about 4 years ago, we went to Orlando in Florida, which was fantastic as well. And treating them as adults is a different experience because sometimes they like to do their thing. So we have to sometimes let them off and go out and entertain themselves with some of the other young ones and then come back and pick them up. But, they enjoy that. They like that bit of independence and we like to have a bit of space on our own as well.
Sounds like it worked well for all sides. So it did work for Paul in Freshwater. Did it work for you? 1300 222 702 is our number. The market is like the old movie sign-off. It's just roaring ahead, isn't it, Ian Verinder?
That's the case today. They knew you were back. They knew you'd had a lot of chocolate over the weekend. Sugar hit time. So up about 1.25%, actually a really strong rise and led by the miners today. All of the miners really forged ahead. In fact, pretty much the entire market was running at full pelt. So, it's quite odd given that New York on Thursday night, I should say, was really everybody sitting on the sidelines waiting for some direction. Well, now they've got it.
Wow. So what led to this?
Well, one of the big things today was this takeover bid from a big American gold miner called Newmont for an Australian company called Newcrest. And interestingly, back in the 60s, Newcrest was spun out of Newmont. Now, it's not the first takeover bid that Newmont's made for Newcrest. They started this process a couple of months back. They've raised the offer once since then and been rebuffed, and they've now raised it for, this is their third, bite of the cherry. And this time it looks like it's going to get across the line. Look, it's if you look at the what they're offering now compared to the share price back when the bid was first launched back in February, 46% premium. So massive premium, largely because gold prices are all soaring ahead with global tensions, both political and economic. And it makes a lot of sense for these two companies to join forces. The American group has a lot of mines in Australia, as well as, and they complement Newcrest mines, plus there's PNG operations as well. So it all fits together quite nicely, and this looks like the final bid that will get across the line.
Meantime, Latitude Financial, Perhaps things aren't going so well at the moment.
No, look, Latitude Financial is a company that it used to be the old GE Money, and when you went into somewhere like Harvey Norman to buy something on 48 years interest free or whatever it was, you'd get your money from GE Money. Now Latitude Financial, and of course, like a lot of companies this year, hacked pretty recently. Cyber criminals broke in, stole the details for a lot of customers. Initially, they thought about 330,000 customers were affected. That's been upped quite significantly since then, and it now seems that there's a lot of people who've done business even within the past 10 years whose details have been stolen. The big development today was that the company admitted that the cyber criminals have demanded a ransom, and the company has said, we're not paying you a cent. We're not going to reward you for criminal behaviour. And also they said they don't believe that even if they handed the cash over, that the records would be destroyed or returned. So that's in keeping with government guidelines to do that.
Latitude Financial. So what's all these events and the market had on the All Ords and the dollar?
Well, the All Ords today, really strong performance, and it ended up at 7,504. Dollar a bit stronger as well, 66 3/4.
There, Ian Verinder, the ABC Business Editor. We'll catch up with you later in the week.
Thanks, Simon.
ABC Radio Sydney Traffic.
Let's cross to the Australian Traffic Network where Jeff Wallace has his eyes on the roads. And Jeff, a crash off the Harbour Bridge.
Yeah, Simon, just watching it now, coming off the bridge down towards Darling Harbour for the Western Distributor on the flyover over Erskine Street. Lane 1 taken out with crews, and there were delays a moment ago back on to the tech off the bridge, but it's easing a little bit. Also seeing Eastern Creek a crash, Wargrove Road, southbound Great Western Highway, and Penrith a crash. That's affecting Parker Street northbound at the Great Western Highway. I'm Jeff Wallace, the Australian Traffic Network.
Thanks for that, Jeff. Let's cross to the newsroom and say a very good afternoon to Adam Story.
Good afternoon, Simon. Advocates... Bit of hesitation there, sorry. Advocates for an Indigenous voice to Parliament have hailed Liberal MP Julian Leeser's decision to back their campaign, saying they hope others will follow. Mr Leeser quit the shadow front bench this morning, allowing him to support the bid to enshrine an advisory body in the Constitution. The Premier, Chris Minns, has hinted the timeline for delivering the Western Metro Mega Rail project may have blown out along with its budget. Mr Minns has confirmed internal Treasury briefings show the 24-kilometre line from the CBD to Parramatta will cost more than $25 billion rather than the $16 billion price tag announced by the previous government. Police are urging the public to come forward with any information that may help piece together the final movements of 42-year-old Erin Gilbert, who was found dead in Sydney's West. Emergency services were called to a Marylands unit on Sunday night after neighbours raised the alarm for Miss Gilbert's welfare. And the New South Wales Chief Health Officer is urging people to get their influenza vaccine amid a current spike in cases. More ABC News at 5.
Did you have a big barbie over the weekend?
I did. I had a couple, actually.
Yeah. What did you put on them?
You didn't get my text inviting you over?
No. No.
Jeez, I must have the wrong number, man. Better check that.
Marnie.
Did it with a Y.
More news at?
What is the time? 5 o'clock.
You're listening to Drive with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
Adam Story there. The current temps for Sydney right now, it's 20 degrees in the coast and in Camden, 19 in Gosford, 13 in Katoomba, 20 degrees both Penrith and Cronulla right now. Tomorrow, it'll hit a top of 24 degrees down to a low overnight of 13, and tomorrow will be partly cloudy with the high chance of showers, most likely in the late afternoon and evening with light winds. Thursday, cloudy, the very high chance of showers, the chance of a thunderstorm and light winds with top temperatures on Thursday of 21, a minimum of 14. Friday, a minimum of 16 degrees, 22, cloudy, the very high chance of showers. And Saturday, partly cloudy, the medium chance of showers with a top of 23. So I think today was the last day to do washing.
You're with Simon Marnie
on ABC Radio Sydney.
We were talking about the ballet, and Marcel saw Don Quixote on Saturday night. It was a delight from start to finish. All praise to the Australian Ballet, and thank you, David, for this production. She says, don't miss it.
Victor Moa, Boomerang, Hills Hoist, One Day Cricket. Aussies are an inventive lot.
It couldn't have been made anywhere else.
Tony Armstrong is rolling open the shed door to explore Aussie creations.
They tell us who we are and the times we live in.
And in there lies the charm.
From Speedos to Stubbies to the humble meat pie.
Enjoy the show.
Great Australian stuff. Starts tonight on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
Travelling with the oldies. What's it like when you're 24, 25 and travelling with, I don't know, aunts, parents, grandparents? Well, it seems as though it's becoming more popular. And Greg, in Burraneer Bay, you travelled with 3 children and their families.
Yeah, good afternoon, Simon. Last year, or late last year, October, November, we had a trip to Bali with my eldest daughter and her husband and their 3 children. 2 of them are twins. My other daughter, her husband, and she's got 2 children. And my youngest son is 27 and his girlfriend. And we spent 2 weeks in Bali.
8 of those, 2 of you. What was it like to travel with 10 people?
It was, put it this way, there was never a dull moment.
But enjoyable across it all?
Yeah, 100%. We got the rules set in place pretty early. We were obviously going along to look after the grandkids mainly, but in the same breath, give our kids a bit of fun too. We babysat a couple of nights while they went out to the nightclubs and partied on, and we looked after the grandkids.
So it worked. You weren't just there as de facto babysitters. It worked both ways.
100%. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we had some nice times, my wife and myself, away from the family on a couple of occasions. And look, I think you've got to have a plan in place before you go. And you've got to make sure that plan is workable for everybody.
Oh, sounds like it was a good thing. Greg in Burraneer Bay. Emmanuel in Sydney says, it's great, had my 20-something with us in Italy, but they still say, are we there yet? Particularly when I took the wrong country roads to find their late nonno's villa north of Venice in the country. It was the best.
I've worked with Peter Dutton.
On ABC Radio Sydney, let's have a world of federal politics.
Members on my right.
Well, hang on.
Members on my left.
I will not be lectured about sexism.
You sit down, Buffett. Order. Mr. Speaker. Google it, mate.
How pathetic. What sort of person does that?
Order, Buffett. Joining us, our ABC political reporter, Stephanie Boris. And Stephanie, a big topic of discussion today, the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs and Shadow Attorney General Julian Leeser has quit the Liberal frontbench in order to campaign for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Here's Leeser this morning saying that this decision is the result of months of deliberation.
I've worked with Peter Dutton for many years, and he has a genuine desire to improve the conditions that Indigenous Australians find themselves in. Peter and I had a conversation about my position last December on The Voice, and we've talked several times since. They've been respectful conversations, but it was clear on the day before Shadow Cabinet and the party room meeting last week that I was in a different position to a majority of my colleagues. At that point, Peter and I agreed that I would take the Passover and Easter break to reflect on my position, which I've done.
Stephanie, it seems as though there was a lot of thinking done over the long weekend.
But not really surprising, given that we know Julian Leeser has been very much supportive of the idea of a voice to Parliament for some time. He has, in fact, been talking about this and engaging with the Indigenous communities for the past 10 years, even before he started in Parliament. I think it was really interesting to hear him put a date on it, the fact that he said he was talking to Peter Dutton about his position back in December, yet he was hopeful a decision could be reached whereby he could voice his opinions without having to resign from the front bench, the shadow front bench, but that wasn't to be. So today, this announcement from Julian Leeser saying, I believe the time for the voice has come. Now, the reason he's had to move to the backbench is because last week, the opposition leader Peter Dutton announced that the Liberals would not support a constitutionally enshrined voice. So the Liberal leader then, Peter Dutton, was vowing to actively campaign against it in the lead up to the referendum. And under the Liberal rules, basically frontbenchers are required to follow party policies, but Liberal rules mean that backbenchers can adopt a different position, hence why we've seen Julian Leeser make this announcement. It is a big loss for the Shadow Cabinet frontbench. Julian Leeser was a strong performer. He is respected by sort of all different sides of the Liberal Party, by both the Conservatives and the moderates. So this isn't a good thing for Peter Dutton. He was maintaining that most of his party doesn't believe in this referendum, but to have someone like Julian Leeser move to the backbench shows that the whole concept of unity within the shadow front bench is no longer.
Are there others in the front bench that follow similar views to Julian Leeser? Could this just be the launching pad for others?
It'll be really interesting to see. There are some others, such as Simon Birmingham, who is in the Senate. I don't know if he'll end up following suit with Julian Leeser, but we do know that he is all but pretty supportive of this voice to Parliament. It will be easier for backbenchers already, given the Liberal rules, for them to talk about supporting the referendum. We've heard from Bridget Archer already, who's a Tasmanian MP, Liberal MP. So I don't think you'll see a huge follow suit with Julian Leeser, but by him talking out, I do believe that will lead to others feeling, a little bit more comfortable in coming forward or speaking their mind.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton said the decision was an amicable one, but reaffirmed his disagreement with the details of the voice.
He doesn't leave with rancour, he doesn't leave with bitterness. He has gone through a process within our party, and his position is at odds with the overwhelming majority of the Liberal Party members in our party room. I think it is important that people get a better understanding, a full understanding of what it is that the Prime Minister's proposing, and have a look at the detail, have a look at the opinions of Greg Craven and others who have an intimate knowledge of how this will impact on our system of government, as well as whether it's going to deliver any practical outcome.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton, and I'm querying whether that is an overwhelming majority of members in the party room. Do we know that for a fact?
Our understanding is there's more against it than more for it. But as I said, I think still just give it a little bit more time, given the referendum isn't going to be held until later this year. Liberal MPs in particular will be, getting feedback from their electorate as to what the feel of the land is. With Julian Leeser, though, as well, he said that he'll support the voice to Parliament no matter what, but he has indicated he'd like some changes to it, including getting rid of the term executive government, raising concerns that could lead to legal ramifications, even though a number of legal experts have said that's not the case. So while Julian Leeser is in support of it, he'd still like to see a few tweaks. So this isn't the last we've heard from him in that respect.
Stephanie Boris, our ABC political reporter, with us looking at the day in federal politics. It's 17 minutes to 5 on Drive. Meanwhile, the member for the Referendum Working Group, Thomas Mayo, was on ABC News 24 this morning, and he says he hopes more Liberals will support the voice.
I think it's great to see Julian take this step. As I said, I hope more Liberals do so. We've always had an open door to not just the opposition, but the crossbenchers, the Teals, anyone else in Parliament to come and ask questions and to learn. And that's what we've done. Every step along the way, we've explained just what a great thing this is to do. And it's good to see Leeser and other Liberals openly supporting this.
And that's Stephanie Boris is with us, ABC political reporter. The government is also negotiating with China over heavy tariffs imposed on Australian barley since 2020.
This is a really interesting development. So the federal government today announcing it's suspended its appeal to the World Trade Organization. To understand what's going on, we need to go back to 2020 when China imposed tariffs of 80% on Australian barley, which, crippled a trade that's worth more than $1 billion a year to Australia. So the then Morrison government appealed that decision to the World Trade Organization, rejecting China's claims that Australia had used subsidies to distort the market. What we understand is that the WTO was due to hand down a finding on the tariffs within days, and the prediction was that the panel would back Australia in the dispute, that it had done nothing wrong. So what we've heard today is that the Foreign Minister Penny Wong announcing China's promise to conduct its own review of the tariffs over the next 3 months, but in return, Australia would temporarily suspend its action that it's taking with the World Trade Organization. So it's kind of giving and taking a little bit here. So the expectation, the hope is that this could lead to China stopping the tariffs, lifting the tariffs, and therefore the exports starting up again. But the Australian government says it still has that option of going back to the World Trade Organization if China doesn't play fair game.
Here is Foreign Minister Penny Wong saying the negotiations are promising, but the government reserves the right to resume its appeal to the WTO.
We're pleased that constructive dialogue has resumed. Obviously, stabilisation and the resolution of trade issues will take time. but we are pleased that constructive dialogue has resumed. We have made clear that we believe there is no justification for the measures that China introduced in relation to barley. We have also made clear that we believe it is in both countries' interests for these trade impediments to be removed. Obviously, if the duties are not lifted at the end of the review period, we will resume our dispute in the WTO.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong. Meanwhile, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton says that China is a valuable trading partner, but that Australia's values mustn't be compromised.
Well, China is an incredibly important trading partner for us. Very pleased if sanctions are lifted. They shouldn't have been put on in the first place. The world needs to unite, not to be divided, particularly the West, and Western democracies need to stand up together. We want peace to continue in our country. We want the status quo in relation to Taiwan. We want to work with China as a valued trading partner. We want to see the jobs and the economic activity continue to flourish, but we don't compromise on our values as a country. And
that is the Opposition Leader Peter Dutton. And finally, a report by Anglicare Australia has found that essential workers are amongst the hardest hit by housing shortages. Everybody's Home spokesman, May Azizi, has said the federal government needs to invest more in housing to address a growing problem.
We'd absolutely like to see the government strengthen their housing package and do more and build their ambition. This package needs to do more if it's going to meet the scale of the crisis that we're in. We know that this government didn't create this problem. This has been a problem that's been building over decades, but they do have a responsibility to do something, and essential workers and all Australians really would be expecting them to do more. There's just only so much that people can afford to pay. If the government doesn't listen, what we're going to see is more workforce shortages in these industries.
May Azizi, the Everybody's Home spokesperson. And Stephanie Boris, this is definitely going to be a growing issue for both sides of Parliament.
Well, Everybody's Home is a national campaign that started back in 2018. The concerns were being raised then about the housing crisis, and they've only gotten worse since then. The problem in particular at the moment, apart from a lack of housing options, is that rents are soaring. And this report produced by Anglicare Australia found that since March of 2020, essential workers, so we're talking about teachers, we're talking about childcare workers, aged care workers, cleaners, they've lost an average of 6 hours from their weekly income to rent increases. And in particular, workers in aged care, childcare, hospitality, some of them on the lowest awards are ending up with about $20 a day. That's it once they pay rent and essential items. So the government at the moment is trying to get through some legislation in Parliament that would see the creation of 30,000 social and affordable homes over 5 years. But this report is saying that 25,000 social and affordable homes every year need to be built to try and tackle this crisis. And even if the government agrees to that, which I highly doubt, the government would take about 20 years to overturn the crisis we're seeing at the moment. So this isn't something that can be fixed quickly. It takes time, but we're seeing more and more reports of what the government's proposing is a good first step, but it still doesn't go far enough to fixing the crisis.
Stephanie Boris, thanks for your time this afternoon.
No worries.
Stephanie's our ABC political reporter at 11 minutes to 5.
ABC Radio Sydney.
The great thing is you can pretty much listen to the ABC all the way to the border, and then you pick up ABC again in Melbourne.
And you know, Kathy, what you do if you want to keep listening to ABC Radio Sydney all the way to Melbourne?
What's that?
You put it on the ABC Listen app, and then you listen to whatever station you want to, wherever you are.
The ABC Listen app. Listen to us anywhere, anytime, even all the way to Melbourne.
Yeah. And you can even connect your phone with Bluetooth and play the ABC Listen app on your phone.
Ah, I have to put that on my phone then.
Get it free from your app store now.
So easy. 11 minutes to 5 on Drive. We've been talking about the generational gap in travel. And David, in Bondi, you travelled with your parents way back in the 70s.
I did, Simon. I heard Ben talking about it, and I've got the other side, that I was the younger one travelling with folks. I was 26, I guess, at the time. I'd been travelling around the world on a motorcycle for a year. And then I wrote to Mum and Dad saying, hey, if Dad ever decides to retire, I'd love to show you around Europe. And I got an aerogram back from Mum saying he's sold the business. We'll see you in London in May. And I thought, this is a change.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I left my girlfriend at the time in Canada and went through, and we bought a camper van and travelled around Europe for about 8 months. And I guess the trade-off for me was I got to do also go to all sorts of expensive places, like up to the top of Norway. So all that Scandinavian travel, I certainly couldn't have afforded on my budget. But with Mum and Dad's money, I could. But in retrospect, because obviously Mum and Dad are now long gone, and I've just got these amazing memories. I know my parents when we were all adults, and that's, even though it was quite stressful at times, as you can imagine.
Well, you were in a camper van, weren't you?
Yeah, we were in a camper van. All three of us sleeping in a camper van, all around the camping grounds of Europe, yep.
But the memories far outweigh any of the small negatives that occurred during the time.
Completely. Sometimes I just smile when I actually remember something that I did with, Mum walking through some caves in Vienna, or Dad's love of collecting beer labels from around the world.
David in Bondi, what a wonderful trip in the 70s. Jane's in Gladesville. And Jane, you've just done this trip.
Yes, we did. We had a fantastic time.
Where were you and who were you with?
We were with our son, our adult son, and we were in India, and we had an absolutely fantastic time. It was wonderful.
Wow. So what did you get up to?
We had a train trip. We went to several very big Indian cities and lots of other smaller places, and stopped off wherever he directed us for lovely street food. And he was really good at sort of helping us oldies navigate our way around. So that was what was great about it.
Sounds like he'd spent some time there.
Yes, he has spent some time there. He's done a lot more travel in Asia than we have. I've done, my husband and I have done European travel a lot, but this was Asian travel, and I haven't done that before in this way. And it was just fantastic to have. He's just been to other places that we haven't, and he had the experience to navigate places that were new to us. So, it was.
And you
just,
learned a bit about him as well.
Absolutely. That was just the most beautiful time with him. And yes, we spent a lot of time in the trains and a lot of time in the in various forms of transport. And yes, you do. You get to know people better, and some of it's stressful. So that's another way of knowing people, isn't it? Oh. It's wonderful, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat.
I can hear it in your voice, Jane, in Gladesville with the 31-year-old son.
You're listening to Drive with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
I am going to use the P word, so if there are young people in the car, cover their ears. Terry says, Patrick in Terry Hill says, "Hello, Simon. I surprised my two sisters and my mum and dad at Heathrow in transit to Dublin. Ended up having a blast with them in Ireland. I got pissed with mum. She's 80 years old, now deceased, at the Jamison's distillery. Pure joy," says Patrick. You know you don't have to text. You can just come in and tell me the story, don't you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
I'm always here to serve you, Simon.
Patrick from Terry Hills.
Yeah. I love having a burner phone. Like I've got a number of burner phones. It's like the Wire, just so I can pepper the ABC Radio Sydney text line.
Then we don't know that it's you.
Yeah, exactly. And if you leave a name that is close or is your own name, it helps with deniability, I think.
But also it means that, say for example, one of the producers rings you and says, "Would you like to tell you that story on air?" And you're on hold, and say you've rung in as Douglas, and I go, "Douglas, you went to Ireland with your 80-year-old mum," and you're thinking, "Why isn't Douglas answering?" And the presenter's going, "Douglas, are you there?" And you go, "Oh no, that's me.
I'm Douglas."
Hi.
Yeah. Okay, that's obviously happened.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
I was watching over the weekend.
Were you?
Well, Reg Ellis is a friend of the Weekend Show. He does our ski reports.
What a lord!
Oh, mate, we are privileged to have him there.
Yeah. You get all the big names.
I've got Pat Stack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where I was getting at. That's the assist for you, they call that in basketball.
What it is?
Yeah.
The assist. Hey, speaking of basketball, went and saw Air.
Oh, any good?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the story, and I just haven't quite caught all the promotional stuff has sort of been peripheral to me, which is a bad thing to say. It's a sports movie. I should be dialed into that. I love...
There's not much sports in it.
There's
a couple of basketball shots, but it's really about the business.
Yeah.
The business.
Is it kind of odd that they make the guys from Nike, seem like underdogs when they're like...
Well, they were
Nike.
in those days.
I know, but it's hard, isn't it, to consider Nike an underdog, knowing now what we know.
They only did running shoes. And the great thing is, as they say in the end, and this is not a spoiler, they ended up... I won't say, but there we go. Tell me all about the surfing, Pat.
Mate, it is all happening. It's Australian Victors Deluxe at Bells Beach. So Ethan Ewing's just picked up the win in the men's. He beat Ryan Callanan, who's also Australian. Ethan Ewing, a really cool story in the sense that his mum also has her name on the trophy. So I know you're talking about going on holidays with your parents. Well, he's just following in mum's footsteps. And she was actually a really central figure in trying to push the cause for men's and women's prize money to be equal in surfing. So awesome that his name goes on the trophy. He is absolutely wrapped. And it's going to be another female Australian who claims victory as well, because it's Tyler Wright and Molly Picklum going down to the wire in the final of the women's event. And a real Master V Apprentice vibe. And I'm not talking about the band. Picklum, current world number one, a young emerging talent, seems like the future of Australian surfing. And Tyler Wright, a woman who is hitting her straps, clearly really dialed in this year. Looked like she had the edge over Molly just when I was coming in the studio, but as I say, going absolutely down to the wire. And if Tyler Wright can be victorious there, what a way to celebrate the retirement or recognise the retirement of her brother Owen in the men's as well. A real family affair. Kind of cool.
Do you have a sponsorship deal with The Wire?
Why have I mentioned it before?
You mentioned it in Burning Phones.
Yeah.
And he said down
to the wire
twice.
See, this is the thing with me,
You'll
Simon.
be on Media Watch on Monday.
Unlike you, I don't have the capacity to think these things through. I'm not you're giving me way too much credit. You're playing chess over there. I'm playing checkers, which is a good game. Good game. Checkers is good.
Speaking of checkers, Australian in the mix for the NBA title.
Hey, I'm well, now I'm really I'm grasping now. So this is what we've got into today on ABC Sport Daily. The Phoenix Suns, Jock Landale, Australia's finest. So he got to the NBA, and the way that contracts are structured in basketball, if you don't get it right, you got to kind of buy yourself out of bad deals, which is what he got himself into a situation with that in a number of European leagues. Had to essentially pay his way out of contracts so that he could be picked up in the NBA. So he was broke when he got there. It was about 2.5 years ago. He's playing for the Phoenix, at the time, San Antonio Spurs. Couldn't really get a game. Has landed at the Phoenix Suns. Not only is he getting a game, he's playing alongside Kevin Durant, Chris Paul, Devin Booker. These guys are the biggest names, or among the biggest names in the NBA. He's right in the mix to win an NBA championship. They're going to be contending when they get into the playoffs. It gets underway later this week. We spoke to him for the podcast and spoke about how his dad, who essentially quit his job in high-flying finance to go run the farm, and that sacrifice kind of informed his own desire to bet big on himself and have a go and go for it. A little bit like yourself, Simon.
And a little bit like Michael Jordan, because that was one thing that's great to come out of air is the role that his mum and dad played. And the mum, what a ferociously firm negotiator.
Strong woman. Don't mess with mum. Don't mess with mum.
Teenagers ripping it up in the world of sprinting.
Oh, yeah. You ready to feel inadequate?
Oh, yeah. I always do.
It's Tuesday. So, two teenagers at the store gift. 18-year-old Ryan Tarrant won the 141st edition of the race in the men's. You reckon he's young? What about Bella Pasquale? 16 years of age.
Uh-oh.
So she claimed the women's. She's 16. Obviously, they both pocketed 40 grand. I hope you feel as ordinary as I do.
Yeah, I'm feeling very ordinary. But we can hear
it's a race
all
to the
of
bottom.
This in the podcast, which is
ABC Sport Daily.
And you get it wherever you
get your good podcasts. But I think the marketing department likes to say to listen up.
Oh, yeah.
It's good. Listen up. It's like Netflix, but audio. It's great.
You know what I like about the Listen app?
Yeah.
I can leave here, walk to the car, get in the car, drive home, go into home, and I still hear Richard Glover every stretch of the way. This is why you do it too, isn't it?
Who's Richard Glover?
Oh, yeah, I wonder. I'm quite comfortable here.
You look good in that chair.
Do I?
Yeah. You look like I've seen you around the halls normally and you're like dragging your feet. You have a spring in your step. You seem renewed.
5 o'clock.
You can find us in lots of places on the ABC Listen app, on radio at 7:02 a.m, on digital radio, TV channel 25 and online. This is ABC Radio Sydney.
Good afternoon, Adam Story with ABC News. Advocates for an Indigenous voice to Parliament have hailed Liberal MP Julian Leeser's decision to back their campaign, saying they hope others will follow. Mr Leeser quit the shadow front bench this morning, which will allow him to support the bid to enshrine an advisory body in the Constitution. He'll join backbench Liberal MP Bridget Archer in advocating for a yes vote after the opposition leader Peter Dutton announced he'll actively campaign against the proposal. The member of the referendum working group, Thomas Mayo, says he wants to see all sides of politics get behind the voice.
I hope more Liberals do so. We've always had an open door to not just the opposition but the crossbenchers to come and ask questions and to learn, and that's what we've done. It's good to see Lisa and other Liberals openly supporting this.
The Premier Chris Minns has hinted the timeline for delivering the Western Metro Mega Rail project may have blown out along with its budget. Mr Minns has confirmed internal Treasury briefings show the 24-kilometre line from the CBD to Parramatta will cost more than $25 billion rather than the $16 billion price tag announced by his predecessors. The previous government said it would have the line open to the public by 2030, but Mr Minns says he needs to see more detail before committing to that timeline.
Well, we don't know what the current delay is in terms of the project scope. If it's changed as the ultimate budget has changed, then we need to communicate that to the people of New South Wales. That would seem to be pretty fair.
Meanwhile, Labor has asked for a recount in the Sydney seat of Ryde, with the Liberals already declaring victory while only 50 votes ahead. Danuta Kazaki reports.
The Liberal candidate Jordan Lane is around 50 votes ahead of Labor's Lyndall Howison. It's the last seat to be decided in the state election more than a fortnight ago. Over the Easter long weekend, Mr Lane claimed victory in the tight seat, saying he would work hard for the electorate. A spokesperson for Labor has confirmed it asked the New South Wales Electoral Commission for a recount this afternoon. Premier Chris Minns currently holds 45 seats, too short of a majority. The Coalition has 36 seats, the Greens on 3, while independent candidates hold 9 seats.
The federal government has agreed to suspend its appeal to the World Trade Organisation amid a long-running dispute with the Chinese government over Australian barley exports. China has agreed to review the tariffs imposed in 2020, and the federal government says it reserves the right to resume its WTO action if the tariffs aren't lifted within the next 3 months. Trade Minister Don Farrell says Australia's preferred method of resolving disputes is to negotiate with trading partners.
And on this occasion, we have sought dialogue with our Chinese counterparts to see if there is any possibility of resolving these impediments through sensible dialogue.
Police are urging the public to come forward with any information that may help piece together the final movements of 42-year-old Erin Gilbert, who was found dead in Sydney's West. Emergency services were called to a Marylands unit on Sunday night after neighbours raised the alarm for her welfare. When police arrived, they found her 38-year-old husband administering CPR, but she died at the scene. Her husband has been questioned by police but has since been released. Superintendent Andrew Holland says all lines of inquiry remain open.
Looking at all avenues for anyone involved. We haven't ruled anyone in, we haven't ruled anyone out. The main thing is we just need to get a timeline of what took place in the hours leading up to Erin's death.
The Chief of Defence, General Angus Campbell, has remained tight-lipped on the prospect of Australia entering any conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan. Tensions between Washington and Beijing have grown in recent days as the Chinese military conducted military drills in the Taiwan Strait. General Campbell has told the Lowy Institute Australia is closely monitoring activity in the region.
Anything that undermines the security, the stability and the prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region in which we live is of interest to Australia.
Australian surfer Ethan Ewing has replicated the success of his mother by winning the WSL title at Bells Beach in Victoria. Helen Ewing won the women's competition 40 years ago and her son overcame another Australian, Ryan Cullinan, in today's men's final. Ewing has told the WSL broadcast how much it means to him.
Such a special thing. I've been thinking about it since I've been on the tour, and it's been a huge goal of mine, and just in honour of her, I want to do her proud, so good.
A few showers developing across the central and southern parts of the state tomorrow. A thunderstorm or two over the southern and central inland plains and adjacent slopes and ranges. It'll be partly cloudy in Sydney tomorrow, the chance of a late shower or two, a top of 24. ABC News at 5:05.
Thanks for that. Good afternoon. Adam Story will be back at 5:30 with the latest in the ABC News.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
On ABC Radio Sydney, on the ABC Listen app, this is Drive. Simon Marnie filling in for Richard Glover, and very shortly, Fluvax. Should you have it? Have you had it? And can you combine it with your COVID vaccine? But also in the last hour, we were talking about holidaying with an age difference. And this text, Airbnb in January with 2 70-years, 7 40 years and 7 kids aged between 2 and 14, all in one house at the Gold Coast with a swimming pool. And best trip ever was taking my recently widowed 80-year-old mum back to England to see the family for the last time with my sister Thelma Louise, and a really poor version of Brad Pitt was the way we were described. Lol, the memories.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Quick look around the roads, Blackheath to Katoomba. There seems to be heavy holiday traffic there, so eastbound is slowing right down. Take it easy if you're on the road there. At Eastern Creek, Walgrove Road at the Great Western Highway, a crash with a car has a southbound lane closed. Roadworks and changed traffic conditions in a few locations. You can get the details at livetraffic.com.
You're listening to Drive with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
You heard Adam with the weather. Currently, it's 20 degrees on Sydney's coast, 20 in Camden, Penrith and Cronulla, 19 in Gosford right now, and 13 degrees in Katoomba. So-called priority groups are being encouraged to book in now for their free influenza vaccine. The Premier, Health Minister and Chief Health Officer made the announcement today. And if you're getting a flu vax, can you get a COVID vaccine booster at the same time? Dr. Charlotte Hespy is a GP and Deputy Chair of the New South Wales ACT Royal Australian College of GPs and joins us. Good afternoon. What's the criteria for a, quote, priority group?
Oh, okay. You want me to go through all the details? Basically, the priority groups are people that we are particularly wanting to make sure they're protected against flu because they may well be sicker and higher risk of dying from it. So anyone over the age of 65, anyone between the ages of 6 months and 5 years, anyone who's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population who is older than 6 months of age, and anybody with a chronic serious illness, but including asthma, but also to morbid obesity, qualifies for that being in that priority population.
But just to clarify, I can be outside of that priority group and still ensure security by getting an influenza vaccine shot.
Absolutely, yes. So really what that defining part of the priority populations is people who qualify for a free vaccine. But what we're actually wanting is everybody to consider getting themselves vaccinated, because a bit like when we talked about it with COVID, the more people who have the vaccination, the less people in the population can then circulate that virus around, which means everybody is protected. So the more vaccinated, the better the protection.
Dr. Charlotte Hespy, GP and Deputy Chair of the New South Wales ACT Royal Australian College of GPs, is with us. So if I'm heading off to get my influenza vaccine, my flu vax, can I get my COVID vaccine booster at the same time?
Definitely, yes. Noting that not everybody is needing to have a booster or may choose not to. The people that, so basically if you've had a COVID infection in the last 6 months, you don't need a booster yet. And if you had your last booster less than 6 months ago, you don't need another booster. So what I would say is if you haven't had an infection in the last 6 months and you last booster was 12 months ago, which is the case for a lot of people, then please optimise your visit to your GP and or pharmacist and get both at the same time.
Now, if I'm somebody that sometimes just feels a little queasy after my flu vaccine, do I have to be aware of that if I'm going to combine the flu vax and the COVID vax?
No, there's no increased risk of side effects. I mean, from my perspective, if you're going to get a side effect from one vaccine, you might as well get both of them done at the same time and get your side effects over and done with. You don't seem to get anything worse. It's more just that you'll get your sore arm and you might feel a bit, off for 24 hours. But what I'm being told by my patients who've had it, so far it hasn't been too bad at all. It's a very individual thing really, isn't it?
Why do I get that? I mean, it's by no means the full-blown flu or anything like that, but sometimes for the 24 hours after a flu vaccine, I never felt it with the COVID one. I just felt like I had a tiny little version of the flu.
Yeah, look, I think it's sort of an interesting thing is that you're getting a shot of a virus particle that is stimulating an immune response to what might otherwise be quite nasty. All I can say is, Simon, maybe you're one of those people who would get quite sick if you got influenza. So it's worth having that sort of 24 hours of minor discomfort to make sure you don't get the 10 days of being really unwell.
I'm totally with you, and I will get both because I'm due for my COVID vaccine as well. If you're not in the priority group, when should you get the jab and from where?
Same place. I mean, for me, obviously my priority is going and seeing your GP and make sure that you're in touch with them and they sort of know what's going on with your health. But, in terms of ease of access, pharmacy has been doing a great job as well. So it doesn't matter if you don't qualify for a free one. You can still pay for one, both through your GP or through your pharmacist. They range in price a little bit depending upon where they've accessed it from, but it's usually between sort of $25 and $30 per vaccine. And it's a worthwhile investment. Having said that, an awful lot of people who are not in the priority group are able to get free vaccines through their workplaces because, it's one of those things as an employer, the last thing you want is anybody coming into work with flu and spreading it around. And so it's a really good public health measure for employers to make sure everybody stays healthy over winter by offering them free vaccine through the workplace.
I know that.
So if they're offering it to you, get it.
I know that the ABC offers it to its employees. I tend to favour going to my family doctor because that's what they are, and they've known me for 20 years or so I can just go to my GP if I want to.
Absolutely, Simon, and I'm with you. That's sort of my preference as well. But, my bottom line is if it's going to be a barrier, then please access it wherever it's easiest for you. Remembering that my priority as a GP is to make sure that your whole health is looked after, and anytime you come in is a great opportunity to just touch base and look after you.
How do you tell the
difference
difference
as well
between the flu and COVID? Are there similarities? If I start to get these symptoms, naturally I would take a rat, but are there similarities between the COVID and the influenza?
Definitely. And, as a doctor, I can't tell the difference. I need a test often to be able to do it. Certainly when we were getting COVID in the first place, there were some differences in those sort of symptoms. But really now, COVID has morphed into an illness that is much more like what influenza can look like a lot of people just the common cold. So it's really important to be alert to any of those symptoms, remembering that we really just don't want to spread COVID or influenza around. And so if you've got symptoms, test, but, wash hands, wear masks, stay away from people who may be more vulnerable to getting sicker than you are. And, do the community a service by staying at home.
And we're with Dr. Charlotte Hespy, what's your feeling about the flu season ahead?
The flu this year?
Yeah.
Look, we don't know. I was with Dr. Chant today as we launched the actual sort of flu program for New South Wales, and as she said, we know that there's been quite a nasty influenza going around Europe, so the chances are that we will have that same variant, which has meant more people have needed to go into hospital, and we're already starting to see it coming through. So again, it could be quite nasty. I don't want to be part of the nasty, so I'm definitely getting my flu vaccine.
Dr. Charlotte Hespy, thanks for joining us on Drive.
Thanks, Simon. And here's to getting everybody to join us and having record good numbers of vaccination against flu.
Dr. Charlotte Hespy, a GP, but also the Deputy Chair of the New South Wales ACT Royal Australian College of GPs.
You're listening to Drive with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
Coming up will be Biden time.
ABC Listen. It's hard not to love Bluey. Whatever your age, it's the biggest little show on earth. Yeah! But have you ever wondered what goes into making an episode? Well, there's a new podcast called Behind Bluey that takes you right behind the scenes. Each week you'll hear from the show's creator, Joe Brum, and his creative team, explaining exactly how all the magic is made. The new podcast, Behind Bluey, only on the ABC Listen app.
At 16 minutes past 5 on Drive, Matt's a pharmacist. You just wanted to clarify why I have to pay at a pharmacy hour rather than not paying at my doctor's, Matt.
Yeah. Hi, Simon. So with the free vaccines, in a pharmacy, they're given by the government to the pharmacist, but there's no payment for their administration. So if you're heading off to a GP, the Medicare will cover that one, whereas a pharmacist doesn't get the cover. So they'll get the actual stock, but nothing for their time or services.
And so don't take your frustration out on the pharmacy staff.
Please don't take your frustration out on the pharmacy staff. We are a healthcare professional as well, so we do. Last year the government did cover us in New South Wales. We'd hope they'd sort of see their ways and try and promote it again. But there has been some material that's been sent through from my colleagues today saying, go to the pharmacy for free vaccine. So hopefully we can clarify this. And most pharmacies do charge just a nominal fee to cover our time and our professional service.
But you're hoping your organisation will allow you to get covered for time through the government as well?
So, long term, you'd love to have pharmacists being remunerated for this service through the government. That's something that needs to be worked through with the appropriate ministers and departments. But yeah, at the moment, we're just happy to provide a service to the community. We just need to be recognised for that service.
17 past 5, Matt the pharmacist.
We're done with the chaos.
The energy out there is real.
It's time for Donald Trump to pack his bags and go home.
Sleepy Joe or Slow Joe?
You call me Joey B.
Will you shut up, man?
Mr. Vice President speaking.
Oh, for the good old days, man. We got a lot of work to do, folks.
And it is Biden time here on ABC Radio Sydney. Simon Marnie with you, filling in for Richard Glover. And Professor Simon Jackman is with the University of Sydney and joins us to raise and look at the question, why is Vice President Kamala Harris so invisible? Simon, welcome back to Drive.
Great to be with you.
It was in the discussion that we thought we had never seen another VP who was so invisible to the press. Is that just here in Australia or is it overseas as well?
Look, there's a little bit to that. She is keeping quite a low profile, but to some extent that's the job. Don't overshadow the boss. And it might say as much about the boss as anything, who, is not a sprightly young man, and I think, look, they saved Kamala Harris for things that, frankly, the president thinks are important but doesn't want to do himself. And, knowing that we'd be talking about this topic today, I actually did a little bit of digging. She made a fantastic speech in Nashville, Tennessee, just in the last 24 hours or so. Of course, Nashville, the site of that horrific school shooting and all the political goings-on since. But a fantastic performance by Kamala Harris, one that I think you maybe see it from the United States, but probably isn't going to penetrate, the news media outside the United States.
That's what actually prompted me to ask, because it seemed to be an exception. She was there after Republicans expelled 2 Democrats from Tennessee's State House for demonstrating against the GOP inaction on gun violence, and she went down there to support those 2. And it caused me and my partner to say, wow, this is the first time we've heard of Kamala Harris for a few months.
Yeah, it's a big intervention on the domestic political stage. And I think one that I think Biden is himself, there's a lot of questions about, is he running for office? I think he gets first pick as to, the big impact moments in domestic politics. For the president to go to Nashville and if you like, pick a fight like that is probably not what the president needs to be doing at this stage of the political cycle, but it is fairly and squarely, right? And Kamala Harris, an African woman herself, the speech she gave was at Fisk University, historically black college in Nashville. The 2 Democratic legislators who were expelled, of course, are African American. That's just, it's made for sort of Kamala, that sort of event, for the political reasons, but also the affinity between her race and that of the 2 legislators. So that one, I think, is much more in her lane than is typical. But I think she's had some awful jobs as well. I mean, in her previous career, she was Attorney General in California. She was a senator from California, really spent her time on domestic issues. Early on as vice president, Biden gives her this job of negotiating with Latin American countries, trying to stop the flow of refugees coming up to the U.S. border, way out of Kamala Harris's comfort zone. But that's kind of the gig.
And did she acquit herself well in that regard?
Look, reasonably well, I think. I think even marks would be the general scoring on that one. It's a really difficult job. You've got very little, unless you're arriving with bags of money to hand out. Basically, you haven't got you haven't got a lot of leverage there. So you're basically having to trade something away. And I don't know that she had a lot to trade away. In that case.
So there's no substance to the speculation she doesn't have the confidence of the president's?
Oh, I wouldn't say that at all. And you shouldn't conclude that. I mean, it's just structurally built into the role that there's no way a vice president can overshadow a president. The president gets the first pick of the agenda. The vice president is doing the things that the president basically assigns. You don't have a lot of room to chart your own agenda, and any champing at the bit immediately starts the questions rumbling, and that's the last thing you want to have happen as a vice president.
I know, but I'm just still looking back. I know the names of Dan Quayle, Al Gore, Dick Cheney, even Joe Biden. Mike Pence was far more visible under Donald Trump than Kamala Harris appears to be under Biden.
Yeah, but think about it. Some of those names you just mentioned, why are they noteworthy?
Dick Cheney, yeah.
Well, and Quayle, right? They got some muck on their shoes, so to speak, and in some cases, spectacular gaffes, right? Biden, I would say himself, a long career in the Senate, knows everybody in the Western Alliance system, would be sent to Australia, to the UK, to everywhere to do foreign policy stuff, very much in his ballpark. But Biden, perhaps most famous for the signing of the Obamacare bill, saying this is an effing big deal. and it's often the gaffes or the out of character moments, shall we say, that propel these poor people who are vice president of the United States, propel them into international visibility. And the fact that perhaps, turn it around, right? Perhaps the fact that we're not hearing so much about Kamala Harris means she may not be doing spectacularly good things, which I think are very hard structurally for a vice president to do, but she may not be doing spectacularly bad things and making mistakes either.
Professor Simon Jackman is with us. He's with the University of Sydney. This is Biden time at 5:24 on Drive. So then this week, Biden announces that he will consider standing for president in 2024, but he won't confirm it till later.
No, he's got to head off the speculation without doing the proper full ball launch. When he does the full ball launch, you want it to be the full ball launch. So in the meantime, we get, hey, anybody thinking about running, I'm running, so you can all just cool your jets. And but watch this space. I think Biden offering, just really wanting to put to bed any questions about whether he's running. He's be the oldest person to seek the re-election, certainly the oldest to seek re-election to the presidency. And so I think he's under a special burden to sort of, I think that wouldn't ordinarily be asked about an incumbent president. Of course, an incumbent president is seeking a second term. I think it's just because of Biden's age that we've got this sort of speculation running.
Should Kamala Harris host aspirations for the presidential role one day?
Yeah, of course she should. It's part of the reason why you take such a crappy job for 8 years, because you sort of earn, if you will, a lot of political capital inside the party. And if not, the presumption of having first right of refusal. I wouldn't quite go that far, and certainly there's nothing on stone tablets that says that about a vice president, but that's why she's doing it.
And are there other contenders within the Democrats for future presidential roles?
Oh, absolutely. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, and I think is ready and waiting. If Biden were, for whatever reason, help or otherwise were not to run, I would consider him a natural front runner. At this point, he is making big moves on the national stage as he's been in the governor's role for a while. He's looking to weigh in on national issues. I saw some press over the weekend where he went very, very hard at Ron DeSantis and the Republicans, clearly not talking about California issues anymore. He's clearly, an extremely ambitious, extremely capable politician who's got his eye on national office, no doubt in my mind. The only question is, I think, when, not if.
And it's interesting. I remember shortly, up to the lead up of the last election and the weeks afterwards, cruel speculation, perhaps, that, Biden wouldn't serve out the full term as president, and so Kamala Harris was being groomed to take that role. That's certainly proved now to be wrong.
I think that's right, and frankly, I think that was a put on by Republicans who were looking to stoke some, a bit of angst among that segment of the electorate that might have views about an African-American woman being president. I think that's all that was about, frankly. But just another one of the less desirable facets of American politics today.
Professor Simon Jackman, always great to catch up. Thank you.
Hey, a pleasure. Thank you.
Simon Jackman,
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
29 past 5, joining us from the Australian Traffic Network, Jeff Wallace. And Jeff, a breakdown on the M4 in Granville.
And Simon, it's a truck, so it's causing big delays. I'm seeing westbound the James Roos Drive up towards Church Street and in towards Granville for Parramatta Road out of Auburn. Very slow run, heading up towards Woodville Road. Lane Cove Road struggling. North Ryde Cox's Road down towards Top Ryde and the Ryde Bridge. And just looking at the M7, bit busy northbound through Polsey Drive, actually, up towards the M4. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Thanks for that, Jeff. A couple of texts regarding the flu and COVID vaccines. And Graham said, I had a flu vaccine and my 4th COVID vax last week at the chemist. It was great. The flu vax cost is small compared to the cost of being infected by it. COVID vax is free, and the pharmacist who injected me had the softest touch I ever had the pleasure to experience. Speaking of soft touches, let's go to the newsroom and say a good afternoon to Adam Story.
Thank you, Simon. The opposition leader Peter Dutton has downplayed division in his party over its position on the voice to Parliament. Liberal MP Julian Leeser, who had been serving as the Shadow Attorney-General and Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, has resigned from the Shadow Cabinet to allow him to publicly campaign for a yes vote. Police are urging the public to come forward with any information that may help piece together the final movements of 42-year-old Erin Gilbert, who was found dead in Sydney's West on Sunday. Emergency services were called to a Marylands unit after neighbours raised the alarm for her welfare. The 10-minute goods delivery service Milk Run has collapsed and will stop trading by the end of the week. The company was set up in 2021, servicing suburbs in Sydney and Melbourne with a promise of rapid grocery and alcohol delivery. And the state government says it will restore Sydney's old freshwater ferries after new foreign built models experienced a surge in issues. Transport Minister Joe Halen says the state's ferry service experienced 7 incidents a month over the past year. More news at 6.
Thanks for that, Adam.
Nightlife with Philip Clark.
We're still sitting reasonably well off. Unemployment's still at 50-year lows. The people are really starting to hurt.
Refreshing and real conversations.
How do you define food having style?
It's about bringing out the natural qualities so that it looks like you just want to dive into it.
Nightlife with Philip Clark. Monday to Thursday from 10 on ABC Radio Sydney. Or listen anytime on the ABC Listen app.
28 past 5 on Drive. Simon Marnie here with you, filling in for Richard Glover. And if you managed to do some washing over the long weekend, congrats, because it's not going to be the best weather for washing over the next few days. Currently in Sydney, it's 20 on the coast, 20 in Camden, 19 in Gosford, 13 in Mount Boyce, and Penrith and Cronulla enjoying 20 degrees. But tomorrow, it'll hit a top of 24 degrees on the coast, be partly cloudy with the high chance of showers, most likely in the late afternoon and evening, and light winds. And then, with a maximum of 14 overnight, it'll be a top of 21 on Thursday, cloudy with the very high chance of showers and the chance of a thunderstorm with winds southerly at 20 to 30 k's. And on Friday, well, it just gets worse. It'll be a top of 22 degrees, cloudy with a very high chance of showers, but winds southerly 25 to 35 k's, but they will drop later in the evening. And Saturday, getting ready for the weekend, a medium chance of showers, winds southwesterly at 15 to 20 k's, hitting southerlies at 15 to 25 k's during the morning. Time to welcome our critics to this little couch to look at TV, music and films. And for TV, joining us, freelance TV critic Lucy Chesterton. Welcome to Drive.
Hello, hello.
Nice to have you on board. We're going to find out about The Swarm on Amazon Prime and Alone Australia on SBS. But sitting alongside her, the mighty Zan Rowe, presenter of Triple J and ABC TV and iView. Welcome back.
Hi, Simon. Double J, not Triple J. It's the grown-up Triple J.
The grown-up Double J. It's just, you see, I would have written it Double J, so I'm going to just change that right now so I don't get it wrong, and I'm going to put that little...
It's confusing, I know.
jazzy one there. And we're going to find out about the artist's daughter and Unknown Mortal Orchestra. And thrown into the mix, Giles Hardy, critic at ABC TV Weekend Breakfast. How are you, Giles?
I'm good, and I apologise to both Zan and Lucy. I'm taking up way too much of this couch.
Look, but we love having you on there, and you're sitting in the middle. Mario Brothers and Tetris. It's a bit of a game movie theme this day.
Nintendo double bill, absolutely.
Well, let's start in the small screen and The Swarm from Amazon Prime, a horror series exploring the dark side of a fandom as a young woman's obsession takes a dark turn, Lucy.
That is right. So this is the latest, the first co-production between Donald Glover and Amazon. Donald Glover, of course, also known as Childish Gambino in the music realm. And I have to say, after making Atlanta, widely considered to be an outstanding television show, this offering is very much in Donald's style. It's very dense. It's very dark. It follows the story of Dre, who's played by Dominique Fishback. She is obsessed with this pop star who, let's be honest, it's meant to be Beyonce, but in the show it's called Naja. And it really is it takes a really unexpected turn. It becomes a satirical serial killer series, which each episode unveiling sort of in short story form, another gory kind of end to somebody in the cast.
A humorous serial killer story.
Well, it's almost everything. There's moments of dark humour, there's moments of satire, there's moments of sort of like it's almost meta towards the end, and there's moments of it being very surreal. It's peppered with names. I mean, of course, we have like Donald Glover, but we also have Paris Jackson is playing playing a stripper. We have Billie Eilish playing the leader of a cult, and we also have one of Barack Obama's daughters wrote one of the episodes, which I'm sure no one expected me to say.
Swarm streaming on Prime Video. In this scene, Dre meets with cult leader Eva, played by Billie Eilish, for a hypnotherapy session.
What's your favourite Naja song?
Probably Love on a Cloud or I Don't Want to Leave. But they're all great. All of them, every single one. She never makes a bad song. They're all great.
Don't Want to Leave. It's kind of a sad one. You must have had a rough childhood. Did people ever call you things as a child?
Liar, stupid, pig.
What are you afraid of?
Nothing.
Are you afraid of death?
No.
Why?
Because I think it's beautiful.
A little scene from Swarm. So it grows with you to become obsessive, Lucy?
Well, Dre starts out really obsessed from the get-go. Like, this pop star is her whole life, but as a viewer, I think you could say it grows on you. Over time, there's a recurring motif of the bees humming, the buzz. So obviously we're comparing the fans to a swarm of bees on the attack and the queen bee of the hive. So it's very, it's not subtle is how I'd put it. But over time, it just, it really is set up to kind of go in a direction that analyses fandom in the modern age. Like, I think of stuff like One Direction, but of course going back to the Beatles and throughout history and time. I do think towards the end it doesn't come to a very compelling conclusion. It gets a little tangled up in trying to reflect reality and jump around through different ways and methods of storytelling. But overall, it's definitely worth the watch.
It is Swarm on Prime Video. As the critics look at a couple of things this afternoon, Lucy Chesterton, freelance TV critic, Giles Hardy, critic at the ABC TV Weekend Breakfast and presenter at Double J and ABC TV, Zan Rowe. And Zan, the London-based folk trio Daughter. That is Daughter with Party from the new album Stereo Mind Game, which Zan Rose brought to the party. And that is the most darkest form of folk I think I've ever heard, Zan.
They really are masters of moody music. They're back with their third album too, and this has been a while in the works because it's 7 years since their last. anybody who knows any of what they've done before knows that they like to feel things. They're very much holding on to those feelings to communicate across all of these songs. But when I first heard the singles from this, and certainly listening to the record now, which has just come out, it's easily their most upbeat album to date. It's really got pace and also a sort of optimism, which is really nice as well. Stereo Mind Game is a way that I've heard Daughter that I never have before. And that might have something to do with the fact that the lead singer, Elena Tonra, who's got one of my favourite voices of the day at the moment, she's just got this beautiful voice. Basically in the last 7 years, between this record and their last, she's become sober. She's singing a lot about that push and pull experience of being sober around friends who might not be sober, on this song Party in particular. But also there's a lot of feelings and mood running through this record on a lot of other planes as well. The other big theme running through this record is a long-distance relationship and just how Elena deals with that. And I think that what Daughter have always done through the music they make is have this sort of sense of yearning. It makes for a very emotional listen. There's a real lushness to what they do. I will say this, though, a lot of the songs, and maybe it is because that sense of yearning, they feel like they're building and building, and that motif can become a little bit repetitive. So you sort of feel as though in some ways you're listening to a similar sort of song. But there is a lot more variation, there's a lot more pace and upbeat sort of vibes on this new record from Daughter, and it's just so great to have them back. 7 years is a long time, and I know that for many of us, 3 of those years were all blended into one because of the pandemic, but it's so wonderful to have them back. I can't believe it's been 7 years, and yeah, with a bit of a different energy for this third record.
Daughter from their album Stereo Mind Game, the track Party. So how representative of the whole album is Daughter?
There's quite a few songs like this, Simon. There's,
Party,
like I said, some songs that are, have got pace to them basically, and then you've got the more sort of swimming, swirling, almost gothic, moody vibes that they're known for. So I'd say about half-half, and that's what makes it a good but not great record for me. I sort of feel as though I kind of know that part of the Daughter story, and the ones that are the most exciting are songs like that, Party, which sound a little bit different to what they've done before.
And Lucy, you've been enjoying playing that as well.
I have, and I have to say that that's such a great assessment because I just feel like it does have a sameness quality throughout. But the other thing I'd love to hear is a little bit more balance between the lyrics and musicianship. There's some songs there's these great lines like, "You're so cold, you're a refrigerator," and I want to hear that storytelling come through and balance more with the arrangements. But overall, like a great debt of thanks for reminding me that it's out there, Zan, because now I know, and I hadn't listened to it. It's been such a long time between gigs. It's so nice to be reminded of what great artists they really are.
But also, Absolutely. Zan, it sounds like a definite growth on the behalf of the band to where they are now.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of growth, I mean, I was listening to the record again today in preparation for chatting with you, Simon, and even listening to it like the third time, I sort of liked it more and more. So I think that there's something that's sort of a bit of a killer about reviews, and I know that everyone who's on the couch right now can agree with me that your first impression is not necessarily the final impression, and this record definitely feels like it'll be a bit of a grower as well.
It is Daughter, their latest release, Stereo Mind Game, as the critics meet to look at what's out at the moment.
ABC Listen. It's hard not to love Bluey. Whatever your age, it's the biggest little show on earth. Yeah! But have you ever wondered what goes into making an episode? Well, there's a new podcast called Behind Bluey that takes you right behind the scenes. Each week you'll hear from the show's creator, Joe Brum, and his creative team, explaining exactly how all the magic is made. The new podcast, Behind Bluey, only on the ABC Listen app.
Zan Rowe just took us through one of her album releases. Lucy Chesterton looks at TV, and Giles Harding looks at ABC TV Weekend Breakfast film. And for you, I walked out of a cinema last night and saw this film up on the display.
Now who's gonna stop me? We're the Mario Brothers, and plumbing's a game. Not like the others who get all the fame. When you think it's in trouble, you could call us on the double. We're faster than the others, you'll be hooked on the brothers.
Thank you, Super Mario Bros. It seems like the only thing you haven't drained is my bank account. For super service, call or text Super Mario Bros. Plumbing today.
Oh, it's Mario Bros, Giles Hardy. I didn't realise.
It is indeed, and that, look, for those who are a little concerned about the sound quality of this film, that is the ad within the film for Super Mario Brothers plumbing services. And look, what we have in Super Mario Brothers is a perfect storm for the critics on the couch, because we live in a world where the critics told the world that this was a dud. This has I think it's a 50% or something in that space on, 56% on the Rotten Tomatoes aggregator. And the audience last weekend gave a solid, I don't think so, to the critics. This absolutely smashed the box office. It's got a 96% score from the audience.
Really?
And I've got to tell you, it's because it's an awful lot of fun. Look, I mean, the Super Mario Brothers game has been turned into more movies and animated series and various short-form socials, and I'm sure there's a flick card animation in every school. This is just something where they didn't try to out-art the idea. They didn't try and get Bob Hoskins in, who was complaining that he wasn't King Lear, and they just went with having a great deal of fun. They almost got into trouble because Chris Pratt's voice in the first trailer upset everyone just because it wasn't the voice of the original Super Mario,
yeah.
Charles Martinet. But then they got Charles Martinet in to play Mario and Luigi's dad, while you've got Chris Pratt and Charlie Day as the brothers, Anya Taylor-Joy as Princess Peach, and Jack Black, who's eating the scenery as Bowser. And I've got to tell you, they got the people from Illumination who made the Minions in to do the animation side, and they've just had a great deal of fun. And most importantly, I took an 8-year-old along as a critic for this, and he just loved it. And then 2 days later, we went and saw another film, which we're not talking about today, and which was kind of fun, the Dungeons & Dragons film. And he got to the end and went, I just want to see Super Mario Brothers again.
Wow. And does it have a plot?
It does. Shockingly, Bowser wants to destroy everything, and Mario and Luigi and Princess Peach are going to try and stop him. I hope that wasn't too complicated. I tried to summarize it. Obviously, it's a really in-depth philosophical analysis of life. But look, in a world where we have EO, which is a Polish Khan winner, which tells you life through the eyes of a donkey, and that got 97% on Rotten Tomatoes and 67% from the audience. That really just tells you the critics want donkey in Polish. The audience just wants Super Mario Brothers in crazy animation world.
I loved EO.
So did
sad.
I. Absolutely, but I think critics have sometimes lost the plot when they go, no, it must be donkey in Polish.
You're with Simon Marnie
on ABC Radio Sydney.
Moving away from donkey and Polish as Giles Hardy, Zan Rowe and Lucy Chesterton look at the releases of the week. And Lucy, one that's streaming on SBS On Demand, 10 Australians are dropped into the Tasmanian wilderness for a completely solitary survival gauntlet. Alone Australia.
Alone. I have never in my life been more grateful for a roof over my head and a couch to sit on when I was watching this show. It's like the opposite of when you scroll social media and you feel really jealous of someone's fancy life. It's the exact opposite, where you're watching people drink out of gumboots and choke down oily eel stew, and the whole thing just seems to be it is literally an exercise in endurance, but they are alone. They are complete. There's no crew. They have their own camera gear and they shoot themselves in the wilderness. The producers don't even know what will be on the tapes until they decide to tap out, which means call to get picked up and rescued from a literal polar blast in Tasmania.
Wow, and it's got all the elements in my mind of some pretty trashy, cheesy reality TV. Does this work?
I'm so glad you used this phrase because they're very adamant. This is a docu-series. It's not a reality show in that sense. Well, it's not presented as such. But, I mean, that's what I found a bit off-putting. I thought to myself, how compelling can one person's journey be when they are alone? There's no gossiping. There's no alliances. It's not a celebrity, get me out of here, or Survivor. There's no relationships, which are what drive so many reality shows. And instead, it's just utterly compelling because the casting is so good. The original Alone famously cast just white males who are survivalists, and over time it's evolved to include now females and people from the queer community, people from First Nations communities, hippies. One of my favourite characters is a gorgeous woman named Gina, who would consider herself of hippie vibes. And I think that's what really makes it, because you see these people behave in really unexpected ways as they crumble in the wilderness alone. And when I say, I mean, they are not given food, they are not given water, everything they have to do themselves except for 10 items they can bring with them, which I had a great time choosing for myself on the website. They've got the list of what you can pick from, and I went on there and had a go at what I would choose, like I was in a video game. It's quite incredible. I really recommend this one.
In fact, Richard Glover caught up with Michael Atkinson, one of the contestants on this season, to share his experience a couple of weeks ago on Drive.
And that's why it's so popular, because it taps into, I mean, we all evolved in the outdoors and in that foraging sense. So many of us have a deep connection, some more than others. I've definitely got it. And the people that watch the show have it. It shouldn't fit in the category of reality TV, because reality TV is not realistic, whereas this, it is, because it is just us and we are just filming with our own stuff. Yeah, you've got to trust that they're going to do with the footage. You know, I mean, you could end up looking like a total idiot. I mean, and if they played all the stupid things I did out there, I probably will look like a total idiot.
Michael Atkinson talking to Richard. Zan, you've actually seen Alone Australia.
Yeah, and I love it, Richard. I mean, I think that on paper, Simon, I heard you say Richard and I was thrown. Simon, I love it. If you see it on paper, then you kind of think, oh, this doesn't make sense and what's the interest in this? But it is a mental game, and I think it's so easy for us to sit back on our warm couches and go, I can't believe they're tapping out after a day or 2 days. But no one knows what it's like to be completely isolated and to really be faced with, some people find it hard being faced by themselves. Not only that, but also in like minus 14 degrees where they don't know where the next meal's coming from, where the rain won't stopping, all of that stuff. You never know until you're put in those situations. I'm with you, Lucy. I think that Gina is an amazing character. She's gained 19 kilos before she's gone on the show just so that she can have 150,000 extra calories to build with. I mean, that's someone who plans ahead. So I'm very excited about the rest of the season of Alone, and I'm so glad that we get to have it in Australia. I will say this, though. Previous series have had things like threats like big bears and panthers. I think the scariest thing so far we've seen in Tassie is a Tasmanian devil, and I don't know if that's scary enough. I just don't think that it has the same sort of fear factor.
Lucy, you were scared of
them. They're so small they can get in your tent.
They're more of an annoyance than something that could kill you. But I think the elements on their own are pretty scary, and it's beautifully shot and just so great to see that come to SBS.
It's Alone Australia, streaming on SBS On Demand. One of the picks from Lucy Chesterton looking at TV, Giles Hardy's looking at film, and Zan Rowe from
though, and I think that Ruben Nielsen, who's the main guy behind Unknown Mortal Orchestra, would be very happy to hear you say that. He has a big love of yacht rock, of the classics, and also the backstory for this particular album is quite something. Unknown Mortal Orchestra, if you don't know, is the project of a New Zealand musician called Ruben Nielsen. He's pretty successful too. He's got 5 records out. He's based in the States and he does really well in America as well as here in Australia and beyond. But the last few years has really upended him. Like so many of us, he was locked down, so making music was done in a very different way, stop, start wherever he could. And then his uncle, who is a reggae legend in Hawaii, a fella called Brother Walter, became really unwell. So Ruben moved his mum and his uncles to the big island of Hawaii to be close to Brother Walter. And Ruben went as well, and that experience saw him reconnect with his Hawaiian heritage. He's New Zealander, he's Maori, and he's also got Hawaiian heritage in just a way that he's never done before. And that kind of sets the scene of what is an epic double album, which really shows the influence. You hear it, you listen back to those last 5 records of Unknown Mortal Orchestra, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's been there the whole time. That Hawaiian slack key guitar, you know, the 80s yacht rock, and also, you know, the Hawaiian style of reggae that his uncle has become the godfather of there on the Big Island. And when you know this, it sort of gives a lot more richness to this epic record. He's a really wonderful pop songwriter. He likes to mess with that with his production and make things weird, but at the heart of what Unknown Mortal Orchestra does is make really wonderful pop. And through the hits like this, Weekend Run, and also a great song called That Life, and a few others that are really radio friendly, there's some gorgeous instrumentals that weave through this record too. So it feels like you're crawling into his world for about 14 songs. And knowing the weather we're about to head into as it gets rainier and more autumnal and then into winter, this is a good vibe. This is a nice Hawaiian tropical vibe that we can live in. So I love this record. I really love Unknown Mortal Orchestra, and this new album, V or 5, it's their 5th record, is a real beauty.
And it sounds, Zan, as though this is not indicative of the whole album. It's a really diverse sound that goes through it.
Yeah, it really keeps you guessing the whole way. Like I said, you sort of just tipped into his world. And I think also, you know, he said to me himself when I spoke to him about this record, if there hadn't been a pandemic, he would have released 2 albums in that time. So you can tell that it is 2 big projects or many, many years put together. And as such, it's a bit of a sonic odyssey, but a really fun one at that.
4 minutes away from the latest ABC News at 6 o'clock. We're with The Critics. That's Zan Rowe, presenter on Double J and ABC TV. Lucy Chesterton, freelance TV critic, and Giles Hardy. And Giles, the second of your films, also a game.
Indeed, we've got time for a quick game of Tetris. So the good news is this isn't someone who's tried to turn the game itself into a movie. We'll have to wait for Barbie to see how bizarre you can get with your stretch of the storylines. This is the story of how Tetris came to be on, well, so many of our devices over the last couple of decades. Really focuses around 2 guys, a man named Alexei Pajitnov. I'm sure I'm pronouncing the Russian wrong here. I apologize. He's played by Nikita Efremov, and he was the man who coded Tetris. But because he did it behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union, it belonged to the state. And a man named Henk Rogers, who was a Dutch national who'd grown up in the United States but was living in Japan, he spotted Tetris and first went to a Robert Maxwell, the disgraced media baron from the UK, who had the rights out of the Soviet Union. And then he had to go into the Soviet Union to get the rights. And this is the corporate espionage thriller, would you believe, about how a series of groups tried to get into the Soviet Union and out again with signed contracts for the rights to get Nintendo and put it on rights for Tetris and put it on the Nintendo Game Boy. And it's bizarrely good.
Wow, here is a bit where we learn the name and Tetris comes from.
Gracie, what are you doing? How's it going? Look, I just invited this young lady over to see how our new game fares with the female audience. Uh-huh. Sure. Come on, Tracy. I'm paying you to sell my game, not play other people.
Relax, Hank. This game is swell. What's it called?
Tetris.
Tetris. I don't get it.
It's a combination of tetra, Greek for 4, all the game's pieces are variants of 4, and tennis.
Tennis?
Tennis. Is supposedly the Russian inventor. He likes tennis.
That is how Tetris came about. Giles Hardy, does it sustain the suspense?
It absolutely does. I was very dubious going into this. I'll be really honest. Corporate espionage is not a genre that necessarily has you on the edge of this very comfortable, if rather crowded couch. But it is really, like, Taron Egerton as Henk Rogers just has to keep pulling out the stops because it's all against the backdrop of nearly the fall of the Soviet Union, the corruption that was going on there, the extraordinary Robert Maxwell story does overlap this, and Roger Allam, who plays Robert Maxwell, along with the weirdest digital hair I have seen in a movie in a long time. There's a lot going on here for corporate espionage, and I was really stunned. And as they say, it's better than fiction.
Well, digital hair reminds me I saw Air on the weekend, and Ben Stiller had a pretty amazing digital hair look. I loved the movie. And I'd like to thank for joining us Lucy Chesterton, Zan Rowe and Giles Hardy. Have a great Tuesday, all of you.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you so much for having us.
Coming up, what's happening at Bells Beach and the ride recount. But right now, time for the news. It's 6 o'clock.
Lend us your ears and use the ABC Listen app in the car. It'll automatically shush when you get calls or navigation instructions. At the next street. Just download the ABC Listen app and favourite ABC Radio Sydney.
Good evening, Adam Story with ABC News. The opposition leader Peter Dutton has downplayed division within his party over its position on the voice to Parliament. Nicole Haggerty reports.
Julian Leeser will join Liberal backbencher Bridget Archer in publicly campaigning yes for a constitutionally enshrined Indigenous advisory body after resigning from the shadow cabinet this morning. A long-time supporter of the voice to Parliament, he says he'll continue to advocate for changes to the proposed wording but vote yes regardless.
I believe the time for the voice has come.
Peter Dutton insists Mr Leeser's perspective is unique.
His position is at odds with the overwhelming majority of the Liberal Party members in our party room.
Minister for Indigenous Australians Linda Burney has welcomed Mr Leeser's support.
The goods delivery service Milk Run has collapsed and will stop trading by the end of the week. The company was set up in 2021, servicing suburbs in Sydney and Melbourne with a promise of rapid grocery and alcohol deliveries. Milk Run says more than 400 gig-based workers will be laid off because of declining economic conditions. The National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union, Michael Cain, says the company's delivery model wasn't sustainable.
Milk Run had an uphill battle. It was a valiant attempt, but ultimately, until we get transport reform in place, then that type of meritorious approach is going to be difficult to pull off.
The New South Wales Chief Health Officer, Dr Kerry Chant, is urging people to get their influenza vaccine amid a current spike in cases. She says it's difficult to predict how severe the looming flu season will be this year. Dr Chant says while the elderly are vulnerable, the under 5-year-olds are often hospitalised and very occasionally die from influenza.
Particularly for those most at risk of severe disease, those over 65 years of age, those that have got medical risk factors, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people over 6 months of age, pregnant women, and most importantly, 6 months to under 5-year-olds.
The federal government has agreed to temporarily suspend a World Trade Organisation dispute over Chinese government tariffs on Australian barley. In 2020, China imposed tariffs on 80% of Australian barley for 5 years, crippling a trade worth up to $1.5 billion a year. A finding on the dispute was due to be handed down within days, but the two countries have instead agreed to attempt to reach a settlement. Foreign Minister Penny Wong says China has agreed to review the tariffs, but Australia will resume its WTO action if they're not lifted.
If this agreement is successful in providing a pathway for the lifting of duties on barley, the Australian Government would expect a similar process to be followed in relation to the trade barriers which exist on Australian wine.
A paramedic has told an inquest into the death of an Aboriginal man in the state's northwest she was unable to monitor him completely after giving him 2 doses of sedatives. Lani Ottaway reports.
27-year-old Gomeroi man Michael Peachy died in Gunnedah Hospital 2 years ago after he was earlier pepper sprayed, tasered and dosed with sedatives during a struggle with police. Paramedic Kim Summer today told the coroner investigating his death she saw him trying to bite officers before giving him 2 different types of sedatives, but that she couldn't access him properly to monitor him completely while he was restrained by police. She told the coroner she accepted those sedatives together can increase the risk of breathing issues. The inquest continues.
Economic inequality is increasing across Australia, with new data showing that lower income households aren't benefiting from a growing economy. The research from the Australia Institute shows the top 10% of income earners are taking up more than 90% of economic growth. Cassandra Windsor from the Committee for Economic Development of Australia says the data shows the federal government needs to act on closing the income gap. She says financial support needs to reach those struggling to pay for essentials, including healthcare and groceries.
One of the things we really can be doing is having some of that targeted support to lower income households who are struggling to pay and access those services, and also potentially some targeted payments to lower income households, whether that's single parenting payments and those that are really particularly struggling.
Newcastle co-captain Jayden Brailey has been ruled out for the remainder of the NRL season after suffering a ruptured anterior cruciate ligament and torn meniscus against the Warriors on Sunday. Brailey left the field following a tackle midway through the second half. And St George Illawarra Dragons prop Francis Molo has been suspended for 3 matches for a Grade 2 careless high tackle during the match against the Titans on Sunday. Molo lodged an early guilty plea and will now miss matches against the Raiders, the Roosters and the Bulldogs. A few showers developing across the central and southern parts of the state tomorrow. A thunderstorm or two over the southern and central inland plains, adjacent slopes and ranges. Partly cloudy in Sydney with showers developing later in the evening and a top of 24. It's 6:05.
Thanks for that, Adam. Hello and welcome to Drive.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
And welcome to Drive. Simon Marnie here with you, filling in for Richard Glover at 6:05. You heard Adam with the weather. Currently, it's 20 degrees on Sydney's coast, in Camden, Penrith and Cronulla, 19 degrees in Gosford and 13 degrees in Katoomba. Tonight, it's going to be a low of 13 degrees, so it might be a bit of a doona evening. Coming up, you might have heard last week when we were discussing how the loggerhead turtle eggs were going. They were laid at Shelley Beach. They were being looked after by Taronga Zoo. Well, they've been released, so we'll find out from Kathy Gilmore at Marine Wildlife Rescue how the release went. Plus, the Rip Curl Pro has a beautiful story of a mother and son win. And just shortly, we're going to find out about the ride recount. But out on the roads...
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Just be careful at Eastern Creek on the M7 motorway southbound off-ramp approaching Wallgrove Road. A semi-trailer and car have collided and a westbound lane is closed. Heavy traffic's building at Granville on the M4 motorway. That's the upper viaduct just past Church Street, as one of 2 westbound lanes are closed after a truck broke down. And the Barara Waters Ferry between Bay Road and Barara Waters Road is closed due to maintenance right now. If you're heading along the Great Western Highway, Blackheath to Katoomba, there was some very heavy traffic earlier and they're expecting that to continue as well.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
The New South Wales Labor Party has asked for a recount in the very close seat of Ryde. Over the weekend, the Liberal Party candidate, Jordan Lane, claimed the seat, but he's about 50 votes ahead of Labor's Lyndall Howison. To look at the recount, we're joined by Ben Rowie, who's an election analyst in the Tally Room at tallyroom.com.au. And Ben, this recount, when it's so close to 50 votes, it's not unexpected, is it? Hello, Ben.
Yeah, I'm here.
So, Ben, it's not unexpected for this recount to be called when when it's so close?
No, it's not unexpected that you would get requests for a recount. I think 50 votes probably is outside the range of results that you would normally see potentially overturned. But, fair enough, they can ask for a recount.
I think somebody else is asking for a recount in the background.
Yeah.
What is the protocol around a recount?
Well, so the thing about the way that they do the counting in New South Wales at the moment is that all of the ballot papers have already been data entered because they'll eventually publish the whole... Sorry.
That's all right. He saw a star. Who saw the star, Ben?
Just be a sec. Sorry. And the... So every ballot will be marked as a preference, And like every ballot is data entered, and that will all be published eventually for everyone to look at. So there's not actually that much potential there for the ballots to change. You know, under other voting systems, you do have situations where a candidate finds like a bunch of ballots that have been miscounted. You know, you find a small bundle of ballots or something like that. But it's probably unlikely that that would happen under the New South Wales system. If they were checking the ballots, it probably would become mostly a focus on the handful of ballots that we're not sure about and seeing how they went.
So is it the party that asks for one? And if so, does it always happen? Or does the Electoral Commissioner decide?
Well, the Commissioner will have to make a decision about whether they hold a recount. My understanding is that the Labor Party is asking for a recount, or at least they're thinking about asking for a recount. I think they have actually asked. So that's going to be something we're just going to have to wait a bit to see whether they decide to hold one and whether they decide like how thorough the recount will be, because you know they could decide to look at all ballots, or they could decide to look at the ones that have been raised as question marks, which they would have identified. There would have already been a whole process of every vote being checked over. Scrutiny is looking at them all already. So if they were to do a recount, they probably would focus on those ones they're not sure about.
So how long does a recount take?
I'm not sure. It will depend on the scale of how thoroughly they decide to do it. And it will also depend on how many votes are challenged. If scrutiny is challenging a lot of ballots, that makes a big difference.
Now, I'm trying to scratch to remember whether the recount has ever resulted in a different outcome.
Yeah, it has happened sometimes. In the seat of McEwen, federal election in, I think it was 2007, ended up being extremely close between Labor and Liberal. And as the vote counts went on, the result count flipped back and forth. And then there was also, I think, in Ripon in Victoria, a state election, I think that was in 2018, or it could have been before that. They both produced changes in results. But again, the margin that triggered the recount was less than the 50 votes we're talking about in Ryde.
Wow, that is a tight margin then if it's less than 50 votes.
Yeah, we're talking about, a dozen or two dozen ballots potentially changing. But again, those voting systems don't involve every single ballot paper being data entered. They're involving, bundling up of the first preferences and then counting the subsequent preferences. But I would say as well, like the Australian system, generally votes get counted on the night, but they always get counted again later. And when there are scrutineers watching, they tend to get counted much more closely. So it's usually a very thorough process.
Ben Rowie is with us, an election analyst at thetallyroom.com.au. But whether it happens or not, the Labor government will still be in a minority, even if they win the seat.
They will be, yes. So they're on 45 seats at the moment. If they were to win Ryde, that would put them on 46, but that wouldn't give them a majority. So it doesn't make a tremendous difference. I mean, it makes a tremendous difference to the lives of the candidates who are running, obviously, and it may make a difference to like how future elections go in Ryde, but it doesn't make a tremendous difference to the electoral outcome, because even if the Labor Party was in a very slim majority, I think they would still want backup options. And if they're 45 or 46, either way, they have a lot of different options of who they can work with.
Well, we'll wait to see. So it's really what you're saying, not fait accompli when a party asks for a recount. It's really up to the Electoral Commission whether they do it.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
And it sounds as though the technology nowadays is probably ensuring that it's a more reliable vote than, say, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, but these systems aren't perfect, but the margin of error for these things is usually pretty small. A dozen votes or a couple of dozen votes. A 50-vote margin would require there to have been a mistake that was not already picked up, and there has already been an extensive process of counting and watching that count to pick up on any mistakes. So this would have to be a mistake that has managed to slip through already.
Ben Rowie, thanks for your time. Go and look at those stars.
Okay, thanks.
Ben Rowie, election analyst with thetallyroom.com.au.
The great thing about your local school is, you walk to school, you never know what's going to happen on the way, who you're going to meet.
Sarah McDonald and James Valentine.
I remember my daughter's second day of school, they were like, draw what you saw on the way to school this morning. And she had the principal give her a star because she saw a mermaid. Now, I don't know how she saw a mermaid on the way to school, but she saw a mermaid.
Well, they were more common then. Breakfast with James Valentine and mornings with Sarah McDonald.
What's happened to the mermaids on the streets of Sydney?
They're in danger.
ABC Radio Sydney.
We need more mermaids. It's 14 minutes past 6 on Drive.
You're with Simon Marnie on ABC Radio Sydney.
Well, at the beginning of the Rip Curl, the waves were not on side, but it seems over the weekend there were a couple of days of good competition and a special result occurred today at the Rip Curl Pro at Bells Beach. We'll find out what those details are because Gary Dunn, ex-editor of Tracks magazine and 17 years at Rip Curl Torquay Beach, Bells Beach local, joins us on the line. It's been up and down as far as the surf conditions go, Gary. Sorry. There we go. He's on the phone. Sorry, I've got you back now. It's been up and down as far as the surf conditions go.
Yes, absolutely. That's probably been the one factor that's been disappointing. But it's the nature of surfing. And I've got to say the spectacle that the World's Best put on today was fantastic. They are, remarkable gymnasts in the water. They're riding something extraordinarily rare. And they just put on a great show today.
And what a beautiful result for Ethan Ewing.
A magnificent result for the 24-year-old from North Stradbroke Island. The people there would be going crazy right now. His mother won the competition in 1983.
Wow.
It's his second World Championship tournament victory, which is he's now ticked off probably two of the best waves in the world and on the world tour at Jeffreys Bay in South Africa last year, and then today at Bells Beach. At Winky Pop, but Winky Pop was really nice and Ethan, fantastic story. His mother no longer with us. He's jumped up the world rankings, 6 places, I believe, up into the very close to the top 5. His opponent's worth a mention too, Ryan Callanan, all Australian final. Ryan's a 30-year-old from Newcastle. The Newcastle people would have been going crazy too. They're both very popular, very well known, characters in their hometowns. It's Ryan's second final in kind of an up and down career, and unfortunately he came up short today against Ethan, who was a standout. He took out 2 world champions today on his way to the final. They both had to surf 4 times, which is pretty grueling. They're out there for 40 minutes. At a time, so and it was from dawn, so it was a big day for them. In the women's, a spectacular again all Australian final. Molly Picklum, 20-year-old from Terrigal on the New South Wales Central Coast, up against 2-time world champion Tyler Wright, 29-year-old, also from New South Wales. Tyler's a mentor and friend to Molly through their a coach that they have both used, and fantastic story. Molly came into the event ranked number 1 in the world after 4 events, and she hangs on to that. Tyler is now second in the world, so it's a great almost midway point of the world tour for the Australians. They've really stamped their authority on Bells Beach in its 60th year of running.
And how did it look seeing Tyler on the waves?
Fantastic. She has been coming to Bells Beach since she was about 10 years old. I happen to be involved with her family. Her brother Owen, older brother Owen, was Australia's Olympic bronze medalist in surfing last year. And Tyler, has won 2 professional world titles in 2016, 2017. Both of them had, significant trials. Owen, quite famously got hit by a giant wave at Pipeline in about 2013 or 2014 and missed 2 years. Basically had to learn to walk and talk again. The concussion was so severe.
Wow.
It was his final event this year, and his final. He decided to announce his retirement. It's sad to see Owen go because he's certainly one of the top 10 surfers in the world, consistently for the last decade. So, a big day for the Wright family. Big day for Molly Picklum hanging onto the world title lead, and Ethan Ewing, incredibly emotional. He's a very composed young man, and he didn't show too much of it, the emotion about his mum, but I'm sure it was there.
And for you, Steph Gilmore was chasing her 5th Bells. Why were you so keen for her to do well? There's a backstory there, isn't it?
There's a big backstory there. Steph is somebody I managed to hear about when she was about 11, 12 years old. This little blonde, very skinny, surfing Snapper Rocks amongst all the guys. And her dad's a great surfer himself. And he's got 3 daughters and introduced them all to surfing, but Steph really took to it. She's his youngest. And I managed to sign her as a 12-year-old for Rip Curl, and she won 4 world titles for us, and then went on to Quicksilver and won another 4 world titles, and is now the GOAT of women's professional surfing all time. She's just a champion person and absolutely brilliant surfer. Made the semi-finals today, but just wasn't quite good enough. Tyler just had a great run today. She was in really sparkling form. Steph too, she's been coming to Bells since she was about 12 or 13. So, those two are right at home. For Molly to do so well as a young person at Bells is a really, really outstanding result. Generally, the Bells champions, don't win at Bells until their mid-20s or later, for the most part.
Now, I know that we've been talking about all the competition on the waves, and I know it's been tricky, but, a mate of mine, Reggae Ellis, just always sends back posts on Facebook that makes you realise there's also an intense camaraderie and community on the beach in the sand from those not competing.
Look, the fans that come to Bells, through my job at Rip Curl and through tracks, I've done 20 Easters at Bells. And when I say at Bells, I mean from dawn till after dusk on most of those. And it's a fantastic event. It's what we call a gathering of the tribe. It's been going since 1962. It started out as Australia's kind of big wave event, if you like. In 1965, they got giant surf, about 5 metres, and that kind of forged the Bells event's reputation. By the late 60s, internationals were coming. In 73, Rip Curl put up the money to turn it into Australia's first professional event, and 60 years later, or 62 years later, thanks to COVID, we're able to run the 60th event, it's just fantastic, priceless. The place is awesome.
How lucky it's at your local, Gary. Hey, all the best. Thanks for joining us, and have a good few days off.
Yeah, reggae sultry tones entertained the beach crowd and there was a big beach crowd. And honestly, the people will stand there and like the beach almost disappears on high tide, and they would just stand there and get wet.
Say hi to Reggae for me and have a good Tuesday.
Will do. All the best, Simon.
Gary Dunn, ex-editor of Tracks magazine, but as you heard, spent 17 years at Rip Curl.
Brand new episodes of Bluey are here.
All right, here we go.
With new games.
This place is nuts.
You guys are crazy. New places.
We are fancy ladies.
New adventures.
You can't stop the big blue guy. What are you doing?
New episodes of the biggest little show on earth, Bluey.
They're on
Streaming for
TV.
free every Sunday morning, only on ABC iView.
6 coming up PM on ABC Radio Sydney, and of course listening through your Listen app. You might have heard last week when we found out about how the 130 loggerhead turtle eggs were going. They'd been found at Shelley Beach on the Central Coast, been cared for by Larry Vogelnest, a senior vet at Taronga Wildlife Park. And I spoke to him about how the turtles were going.
And it wasn't long before we had the first little turtles hatching.
No way.
And yeah. So far things are going well. We've had quite a number of them hatch. It's early days yet. We still want to obviously have more of them hatch before there's any thought about when to return them to Shelley Beach for release there.
So obviously the care went well enough because today those turtle eggs were released, and a person that was there to watch it is Kathy Gilmore. She's with the Marine Wildlife Rescue on the Central Coast, joins us on the line. That moment where 130 or so eggs and turtle hatchlings made their way across into the water. What was that like, Kathy?
Oh, good afternoon, Simon. It was pretty cool. They were actually released on Easter Sunday, and we had 93 join us for us to release on Sunday afternoon, like on dusk. The waves were pretty crazy, and we were getting some washing back in, but a majority of them made it out past the break and are out, hopefully living their best life and dodging any predators.
And there's a really good reason why they're to be released at the same location they were found, wasn't there?
Look, they say that turtles come back to the same beach that they hatched at. So it's like when they're running from that sand, it imprints magnetic. There's something that, obviously 110 million years of turtles that it's really important that they get to do that run into the ocean. So it was really important for them to come back and be released from Shelley Beach here on the Central Coast.
Even as a kid, right through till today, I think there's nothing more gut-wrenching than watching the wildlife footage of the turtles making that, or the turtle hatchlings making that journey and being picked off by all sorts of predators.
I know, they've got to dodge the crabs and the seagulls, and then they get into the water and they've got to dodge the fish that are there waiting. I guess the beauty of the Shelley Beach Central Coast nest is this isn't something that the predators here look for, because this just doesn't happen. This was a really rare event. So there were no seagulls or there were no crabs waiting for them.
But there was Kathy Gilmore looking after them as well.
That's right. We were going to make sure that all of our little turts made it into the water, that was for sure.
Oh, look, the seagull world knows not to mess with Kathy Gilmore, let me tell you. So do we know their fate, or is that just now up to nature?
That's now up to nature, once they're out there, you don't know. They'll swim out, jump on the EAC, and off they'll go on a amazing adventure. He's hoping, jump on, probably go down towards New Zealand and then head up towards Tonga, wherever the EAC is going to take them.
amazing journey. Kathy Gilmore,
It is.
thanks for sharing the story. Kathy's with the Marine Wildlife Rescue on the Central Coast. Before we go to the latest edition of PM, and then evenings from 6:30 with Casey Bonetto.
ABC Radio Sydney Traffic.
Jeff Wallace joins us from the Australian Traffic Network, and a nasty little crash on the Pacific Highway at Pymble, Jeff.
Yes, Simon, northbound, just past Monovar Road. 2 lanes are taken out. Traffic just squeezing past in the far right lane. Another crash just coming through Minchinbury, Great Western Highway, Beaconsfield Road. A third one, Wetherill Park, Victoria Street, Hassel Street. I'm still seeing that broken down truck on the M4 westbound. It's just past James Rees Drive at Granville, near the Church Street on-ramp. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Thanks for that, Jeff, and thanks for your company today. I'll be back tomorrow. Richard joins us back from holidays, refreshed and fanging to go next Monday on ABC Radio. PM is up next, but then Casey Bonetto joins you with Evenings from Melbourne. Tomorrow, partly cloudy, the high chance of showers most likely in the late afternoon and evening. Light winds, top temperatures around 24 degrees. Right now, though, time for the news. Oh no, it's time for PM, 6:30.
You can find us in lots of places. On the ABC Listen app, on radio at 7:02 AM, on digital radio, TV channel 25, and online. This